Be with you all. Today we're going to read for you, my dear fellow brothers and sisters, the final part of the book, The Three Mountains. That's mean, the second mountains, the mountain of resurrection, and the third mountains, the mountain of the Ascension. I hope you enjoy it. Second mountain. The Resurrection, Chapter 28. Serenity and Patience. It is clear that we, the brothers of the Temple of the Twice-Born, have eliminated from our psyche several subjective, if for human aspects. However, after having gone through the 8 initiations, we yearned with all the strength of the soul to join the magic esoteric works of the Mountain of the Resurrection. In the temple we were told that we should wait with infinite patience for the abbot of the monastery. However, it is evident that the long and boring hours passed with an unbearable monotony. The Venerable One did not seem to be in any hurry. Some of the veterans of the first mountain were everywhere, here and there, protesting impatiently for the singular delay of the superior. There are events in this life which are surprising, and one of them was the astonishing entrance of the abbot of the temple. All the brothers of the sacred order were amazed, because some of our people had already lost any hope of seeing the master. Before the sacred brotherhood the Venerable One spoke, saying, "Brothers, you are missing 2 virtues that this brother does have." Saying this, he pointed at me with the index finger. Later on, in a manner at the same time sweet and imperative, he ordered me thus, "Brother, tell them which are those virtues." "One must know how to be patient, one must know how to be serene," I said with a clear and deliberate voice. "Can you see now? Are you convinced?" Burst forth the abbot with great solemnity. The adepts, at the same time scared and amazed, chose to keep a respectful silence. Unquestionably, all the members of the congregation, with my exception only, had then to be deferred, because only my own insignificant, worthless person came victorious out of this difficult test. The austere Hierophant then presented me with a beautiful orange. I captured its deep meaning immediately. Much later in time I had to appear before the brotherhood of another monastery of the Universal White Brotherhood with the definite purpose of receiving instructions and signing documents. Then I was warned with the following words: "You must take good care of the lunar chill." It was urgent for me to come back to the burning forge of Vulcan after a long recess. Unquestionably, between mountain and mountain there are always long periods of sexual abstinence. Chapter 29. The 9 Grades of Mastery. To capture, apprehend, understand in an integral manner the deep significance of the 9 masters that went looking for Hiram and his murderers is urgent and cannot be postponed. Unquestionably, none of the 9 masters went to the northern regions, but cleverly separated into 3 groups of 3 each, and went respectively to the east, the south, and the west. In fact, it was this last group who managed to find the grave and the murderers. This symbolic esoteric pilgrimage of the 9 masters refers specifically to the individual pilgrimage that every initiate must undertake in the second mountain, going through 9 successive stages or grades totally enumerated and defined in the 9 spheres: Moon, Mercury, Venus, Sun, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune. We can and even must make the following announcement: only by means of these intimate pilgrimages from sphere to sphere are we in the position to enliven and revive inside of ourselves the secret master, Hiram, Shiva, the husband of our divine mother Kundalini, the Arch-Hierophant and Archmagus, the particular individual monad, our real being. It is one thing to be a master, quite another to reach perfection in mastery. Any esotericist who makes the Tasoma Heliacon, the wedding dress of the soul, in the forge of the Cyclops, becomes a man and thus a master. However, perfection in mastery is something quite different. The number 9, applied to the rhetoric, places us within an intimate relationship with the 9 eternal muses. It is not too much to cite in this chapter each of these ineffable deities of the ancient classicism. 1. Clio. 2. Erato. 3. Melpomene. 4. Calliope. 5. Euterpe. 6. Talia. 7. Urania. 8. Polyhymnia. 9. Terpsichore. Listen to me, a certain night, no matter the date, the day, or the time, splendidly dressed in the wedding dress of the soul, I left the physical body at will. Experiencing in the full presence of my cosmic being a certain exquisite spiritual voluptuousness, I floated softly in the aura of the universe. Feeling supremely happy, I had to put my feet like a bird on the mud of the earth, under the green foliage of a taciturn tree. Congratulations, I cried out in a loud voice, invoking the adepts of the occult brotherhood. Unquestionably, I was assisted. The brothers lead me amicably to the marvelous temple of the transparent walls. The Mahatma stayed sitting down before his desk as he was attending to many people. I want to know, I said, what is it that I am in need of? The Venerable One, getting from a drawer in his desk a certain secret book, consulted its pages and then answered, you are in need of 58 minutes. You must present here 36 bolivares, each of 23 kilos. And the 8 initiations that have been received must be accredited. Thank you, Venerable Master. Later on, I left the temple with infinite humility and veneration. Kabbalistic analysis of this matter. 58 minutes, 5 plus 8 equals 13. This arcanum signifies the death of all the subjective elements that constitute the ego. 36 bolivares, 3 plus 6 equals 9. To break the chains and fetters in the submerged worlds of the 9 planets referred to in this chapter, very intense work in the burning forge of Vulcan. 23 kilos, 2 plus 3 equals 5. The work of liberation must be perfect under the splendors of the burning star of 5 points. It is not too much to remember now the Rishi Bahadeva and his 23 prophets. Accreditation. Before the true resurrection, every one of the 8 initiations must be accredited. This is processed during 8 years, during which we have to experience the Book of the Patriarch job in all of its crude realism. We emphasize solemnly the following declaration. The 8 initiations will never be accredited in a period less than the one indicated above, of 8 years. Obviously, 1 year corresponds to each of the 8 initiations. As a corollary, 8 years are needed for the 8 initiations. I clarify this. The already mentioned period of time corresponds exclusively to the epilogue of a whole mystical series of deep esoteric works carried out in all and each of the 9 planets already referred to. Undoubtedly, such works are processed in different periods of time, and sometimes are very delicate. It is clear that everyone who joins the second mountain receives no more grades or initiations. The perfection in mastery is only reached with the esoteric transcendental resurrection. The full manifestation of the monad inside the resurrected master bestows extraordinary magical powers upon him. Chapter 30. The Patriarch Enoch. The symbol of time, to which the ring of bronze also makes emphatic reference, leads cyclically to the Gnostic Arhat, as far as that ancient patriarchal epoch also known as the Bronze Age or Dvapara Yuga, which undoubtedly preceded our own Iron Age or Kali Yuga. The best writers of treatises on occultism have always asserted that in between these 2 ages the second great catastrophe took place that totally modified the geological physiognomy of the planet Earth. Among the 10 sublime antediluvian patriarchs, the 7th is, beyond discussion, totally different from the 6 that preceded him in the course of the centuries: Adam, Seth, Enos, Kenan, Mahalalel, Jared, as much as he is from the 3 that succeeded him: Methuselah, Lamech, Noah. However, it is clear that what amazes us most in all this is the sacred name of Enoch, which translated means initiate, dedicated, consecrated, master. The Hebraic Genesis, v.24, asserts in a solemn manner that Enoch did not die physically, but that he walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. Very ancient esoteric traditions lost in the night of the centuries say clearly that, being Enoch on the majestic summit of Mount Moriah, he had a clairvoyant samadhi in which his visionary objective consciousness was carried away and taken to the 9 heavens cited by Dante in his Divine Comedy, and in the last of which the one of Neptune the Patriarch found the lost word, his own logos, his particular individual monad. Later on, that great Hierophant wanted to express that vision in a permanent and eternal memory. Categorically and with great wisdom he arranged that under this same blessed place a secret underground temple was built, consisting of 9 domes laid out successively one under the other, inside the living entrails of the mountain. His son Methuselah was certainly the architect in charge of building this extraordinary sanctum. The contents and specific roles of each of these domes or magical caves have not been mentioned. Spiral staircases connected them to each other. The last of these caves is, however, the one with all the occult importance, in such a way that those before it only constitutes the indispensable secret path by means of which the last one is reached in the deepest part of the mountain. It is this last one, the most intimate sancta, where the patriarch Enoch deposited his richest esoteric treasure. The golden fleece of the ancients. The ineffable and everlasting treasure that we look for is never found on the surface, but we must scratch, dig, search for in the entrails of the earth until it is found. Going down bravely to the entrails or hells of the Mount of Revelation, the initiate finds the mystical treasure his divine monad which has been conserved for him throughout the uncountable centuries that preceded us in the course of history. In chapter 2 of the Apocalypse or Revelation of St. John 19 we can still read the following. To him who conquers I will give some of the hidden manna. I will give him a white stone, with a new name written on the stone that no one knows except him who receives it. Chapter 31. The Lunar Heaven. The great individual work takes place in the zodiacal dominion of the Titanic. Potencies. The 12 labors of Hercules, prototype of the authentic man, signal the secret way that will lead us to the grades of perfect master and great elected one. First of all, comes the capture and death of the lion of Nemea, the force of instincts and uncontrolled passions that devastates and devours everything. In a state of ecstasy, I was taken conscious to the lunar world, or astral world, then I was given advice with infinite wisdom. My soul was shaken to its most intimate depths when it found there the ancient of the temple of the twice-born. Our beloved rector, the sacred ancient, certainly appears to have all the characteristics of a lemon, but it is clear that he irradiates infinite love. I understood that to have the right to ascend to the lunar heaven, superior astral, I first had to descend to the lunar hell, inferior astral, and bravely confront the three furies. At this moment in which I am writing these lines, it comes to my memory that initiatory passage in which Ginez de Lara, led by his master, astonished contemplates the steely waters of the lake. Look here now, said the Mahatma. And Ginez looked, as with a gigantic telescope, at the inhabitants of the near side of the moon, unhappy, unlucky beings, about whose nature and origin a great mystery is made by those who know everything. And he saw afterwards something even more marvelous, the secret of the other side of the satellite, that is of the hemisphere always turned away, from which the miserable earth is never seen, and a place where some mystics have wanted to locate therefore the paradise of Enoch and Elias, the two jinn of the Hebraic people. Let us continue, after this small digression, with the subject of the present chapter. When I wanted to climb the symbolic Jacob's ladder, the sacred ancient of the temple pulled from the tree of knowledge or tree of the science of good and evil a delicious branch and gave it to me to smell. That fragrance was certainly nirvanic. Always smell this branch so that you can climb, thus were the words of the adept. Unquestionably we must practice the Sahajamethuna, to breathe in the delicious fragrance of the forbidden fruit, but not eat it, that is the law. In the abyss of Selene, I started my work by disintegrating Judas, the demon of lust. It should be mentioned now that thanks to the direct help of my divine mother Kundalini, the horrible demon of lust was reduced to ashes. Somewhat later on I had to continue my work with the restless demon of the mind, who so much bitterness brings to us, the abominable pilot of all times. Annihilation. Terrible word. This was the final catastrophe of the fatal pilot that tormented me. Later on, I continued my work in the abyss, attacking Caiaphas, the demon of ill will, the most detestable of the three classical furies in the interior of each of us. The third fury certainly died after receiving several lance thrusts in the body. None equaled her horrible appearance, none had in her hair as many snakes, her own sisters were afraid of her. This unhappy fury had in her hands all the poisons of hell. I could verify with surprising clarity the whole of the death process of the three furies. It is unquestionable that they went through all the magic transformations chanted by Ovid. If at the beginning they were gigantic and horrible, like the monster Polyphemus of the wicked country, who ate the companions of Ulysses, afterwards, some moments before the sovereign Parca arrived, they already had the aspect of newborn children. Those abominable shadows, those 3 traitors I carried inside, luckily died. Oh, my God! What will happen to me without the help of my divine mother? Kundalini? I invoked my mother from the depth of the abyss, and she gripped the lance of Eros. Chapter 32. Guinevere. The eternal lady, the soul spirit, Booty, always requires from her gentleman, the human soul, superior Manus, every kind of outrageous sacrifice and prodigy of valor. She, the perfect divine wife, is Guinevere, the queen of Jinn, the one that poured the wine for Lancelot. Delicious wine of the transcendent spirituality in the initiatory cups of Sukra and Manti. Cups which are nothing, in fact, but the holy grail in its meaning of chalice of the supreme beverage or initiatory nectar of the holy gods. Happy is the knight who after the hard struggle celebrates his wedding with the Queen of Jinn. It is written in golden letters in the book of life that inside the Booty, spiritual soul, like a vase of alabaster, delicate and transparent, burns the flame of Prajna, the being. During one night of indisputable delights, I experienced the happiness of finding my loved one in the secret place of the second mountain. The carriage of my betrothed advanced slowly along the lonely road. It is said in the legend of the centuries that the Marquise of Beaupré used to travel in a carriage of singular beauty, made of pure porcelain, but the triumphal carriage of my adorable Valkyrie resembled that other carriage that in times of the Rococo was used by the wife of the Duke of Clermont, splendid carriage with a team of 6 horses that wore silver horseshoes and wheels rims made of that same metal. The triumphal carriage of my beloved stops before a palace of shining porphyry, where the riches and splendors of the Orient brighten the walls and panels. The splendid vehicle stops before the doors of shining brass, which frighten with their majesty. Soon a friendly choir surrounded the carriage, distinguished gentlemen, princes and nobles, beautiful ladies and delicate infants. Somebody gives a signal and I obey. I move towards the carriage of love, and see through the crystal panes of happiness my Valkyrie, Booty. Dressed in the wedding dress of the soul, my betrothed has arrived in her shining carriage for the wedding. To get married before the holy altar with my twin soul, the theosophical Booty. My God, what happiness! However, I was told that I had to wait for a short time. The virile provider of the force from above had delayed me, and I suffered in an indescribable way. Around that time I had to immerse myself deeply in the sacred mysteries of Minna, the frightening lunar darkness of a love that is a twin brother of death itself. I worked intensively in the superdarkness of silence and the august secret of the wise men. I had to wait for a time. However, I sighed for Guinevere, the queen of Jinn, my spiritual soul. A certain night, the stars shining in the infinite space seemed to have a new aspect. Far from the worldly noise I was in ecstasy, the door of my room was hermetically sealed. It was certainly then, at that time, when I celebrated the wedding with my adored one, Booty, she entered me, and I got lost in her. At those instants of happiness, the sun of midnight, the solar logos, shone intensively. I felt transformed in an integral manner. The famous Chakra Sahasrara, the lotus of the 1,000 petals, the crown of the saints, shone victorious in my pineal gland, and I went into the state known by the Hindustani with the Sanskrit term Paramananda, supreme spiritual happiness. It was then that I felt the need to become an authentic and legitimate Brahmavidvarishta. The 1,000 yogic nadis of the Sahasrara conferred to me, in fact, power over certain subtle forces of nature. Booty, my Guinevere, my spiritual soul, besides taking the Shiva Shakti Tattva to the maximum of vibratory activity, had put the coronary Padma in a certain state of intensified mystical functioning. Then I saw myself become the messenger of the new Aquarian age, teaching humanity a doctrine so new and revolutionary, and however so ancient. When I opened the door of my room, the diamond eye, the pineal gland, let me see many enemies. It is obvious that the diffusion of gnosis, in its revolutionary form, will increase progressively the number of my adversaries. It is not too much to say that after this great cosmic event, a certain nuptial rite had to take place in the temple. Many people attended this festival of love. Unquestionably, in the fifth initiation of fire, I had incarnated my human soul, the superior Manas of Theosophy. However now, oh, gods! With this alchemical and Kabbalist wedding I incarnated also my spiritual soul, the Buddhi. In fact, inside the spiritual soul always burns in an unalterable manner the flame of Prajna, the intimate. Chapter 33. The Dragon of Darkness. I believed that after the chemical wedding with my spiritual soul I would enter fully into a paradisiacal honeymoon. I did not remotely suspect that among the submerged dens of the human subconscious would be hiding the left-hand and sinister Mara of the Buddhist gospel, the famous dragon of darkness cited in the Apocalypse by St. John, the father of the three traitors. Gigantic abysmal monster of 7 infrahuman heads, always personifying the 7 deadly sins: anger, greed, lust, envy, pride, sloth, and gluttony. And the beast roared dreadfully like a lion, and the powers of darkness shuddered with horror. Only by means of the sexual transcendent electricity in full sexual magic it is possible to reduce to cosmic dust that horrible abysmal monstrosity. Luckily, I could make maximum use of the coitus reservatus to direct my pleadings to Devi Kundalini, the igneous serpent of our magic powers. The monster holds the frightful lance in his left hand. 3 times he tries in vain to hurt me. Desperate, he throws the hard spear at me. My divine mother Kundalini intervenes and gets hold of the singular relic, and with it she mortally wounds the red dragon. Mara, the horrible infernal beast, loses then his gigantic size, gets smaller bit by bit, is reduced finally to a mathematical point and disappears forever from the sinister cavern. Later on, that fraction of my consciousness that was engaged before with the abominable monster returns, comes back to me. The secrets of the old abyss are terrible. It is a somber and limitless ocean, where the primogenital night and the chaos, grandparents of nature, heap a perpetual anarchy in the middle of the rumor of eternal wars, sustained with the help of confusion. The heat, the cold, the humidity, the drought, those 4 terrible champions, fight there for superiority and lead to combat their embryonic atoms which, grouping around the ensign of their legions and gathered together in different tribes, armed either in a light or a heavy manner, sharp or rounded, fast or slow, swarm as innumerable as the sands of the Barca or of the blazing beach of Cyrene, pulled along to take part in the struggle of the winds and to serve as ballast to their rapid wings. The atom to which adheres the highest number of atoms dominates for a moment. The chaos governs as an arbiter, and its decisions augment the disorder even more, the device by which it reigns. After it is clear that in those infernal worlds chance governs everything. Before that wild abyss, cradle and grave of nature, before that cavern that is neither sea nor land, nor air or fire, but is formed by all those elements that, mixed in utter confusion in their fertile causes, must always fight in the same way, unless the creator demiurge disposes of his black materials to form new worlds. Before that, barbarous Tartarus, the dragon of darkness, exhaled his last breath. It is easy to descend to the infernal worlds, not so easy to return. There is the hard work. There is the difficult test. Some sublime heroes, in fact just a few, have managed the triumphal return. Impenetrable forests separate the Avern from the world of light, and the waters of the pallid river, the Cocytus, mark out labyrinthine convolutions in that darkness, whose image makes one tremble. 4. The conclusion of the lunar labors. After having reduced Mara, the father of the 3 Furies, to cosmic dust, I had to confront the secondary beasts of the abyss. The day was finishing slowly. The delicious air of the night was inviting the living beings that inhabit the face of the earth to rest from their travails, and I, vile worm in the mud of the earth, only wished to bear the struggles of the path and of those things, worthy of compassion that my memory will write without mistakes. Oh, ineffable muses! Oh, high divine talent! Come to my help, inspire me so that my style is not incompatible with the nature of the subject. My deep sleep was interrupted by a very strong thunder. Like a man who has been awakened in a violent way, I got up and, looking around me, I tried to find out what kind of place I was in. I saw myself then in a lonely house next to a dark road. Seated on a coarse armchair next to the window, from which one could see the steep path, I evoked very sincerely times gone by. I had certainly been there in times gone by, in the mansion of the abyss, and before this same path. Nothing of all this appeared new to me. I understood that I was recapitulating mysteries. Getting up from the chair, I opened the old door of that house and went out, walking slowly, slowly, by the solitary road. In a single glance, and with my sight spread out across as far a space as it is possible with the penetration of spiritual sight, I saw a sad place, devastated and somber. The floor was humid, and I had to stop before an electric cable lying on the pavement. A copper cable charged with high tension. What horror! And I was nearly standing on it. It is better to die free than to live in captivity. Thus said the voice of silence in the night of the mystery. And I, in a state of alarm, who was trying at that precise moment to move back, felt encouraged. I went forward resolutely through those sublunary places along the abysmal winding road. The steep path, turning suddenly to the left, lead to certain picturesque hills. In them I saw something like a national park on Sunday, a colorful ensemble of human creatures that appeared to be having a good time on the meadow. Some peddlers moved around selling colored balloons for the solace of many. People. A living symbol of profane living, thus I understood it. However, it is clear that I wanted to live all of this with intensity. I was very absorbed in all of this, contemplating the crowds, when suddenly something unusual and unwanted happened. It appeared to me that time itself stopped. For a moment. At that time of terror, a bloodthirsty wolf appeared from the bushes. Ferocious, it tries in vain to catch its prey. Before him some hens try to escape, crowing in desperation. Extraordinary occult symbolism, barnyard fowl, faint-hearted and cowardly, shy. Bloodthirsty wolf, cruel, merciless. Fright. Terror. Astonishment. Human sublunary states of the human infra. Consciousness and I, who believed to have died in myself, ignored the existence of these psychical aggregates inside my own atomic hells. Luckily, I never forgot my holy spear during this hard struggle, thanks to my Divine Mother Kundalini. I have done better than many with respect to the force and skill of the lance. Having already destroyed the main demon egos, vile embodiments of my horrible ifra-human defects, my lunar tasks finished in an epic manner, killing with the holy shaft many other infernal beasts. It is not too much to say that I got to collect a very rich bounty of war after so many bloody battles. I wish to refer with great emphasis to those multiple precious gems of my own existence, to those grains of consciousness remaining among those frightful abortions from hell. The last part of the task was of a totally atomic character. It is not easy to expel the malignant intelligences from their nuclear habitats. This is certainly what is understood by the transformation of the black waters into white. Now, these atoms have become marvelous vehicles for certain luminous intelligences. Magnificent sparks, atoms capable of giving information about the activities of the secret enemy. One night of glory, I had the greatest honor that can be bestowed on a human being. I was visited by the cosmic Christ. The adorable one had a great book in his right hand, as if saying, "Now you are entering the sphere of Mercury." When I saw the Master, I could not but say, "Lord, you have arrived earlier than I thought. I was not expecting you yet." The living Christ answered sweetly, "I sometimes get delayed when it is my turn to come here in March. You still have to continue dying in yourself." How? To continue dying? Still? Yes, answered the adorable one, you have to continue dying, he repeated. What happened then was miraculous. The Master ascended slowly towards the sun of midnight, quitting the vicinity of the King of the Stars after a while to bless me and forgive my ancient errors. In this way I succeeded in rejoining the first heaven, the abode of the ineffable angels. Unquestionably I was a fallen angel, but it is clear that I had been forgiven. In the cathedral of the soul, there is more happiness for a sinner that repents than for 1,000 just persons that have no need of repentance. Chapter 35. The Heaven of Mercury. The second labor of Hercules is to happen now, transcendental and transcendent, the destruction of the Hydra of Lerna, symbolic monster of immortal origin, endowed with 9 threatening heads that regenerate themselves each time they are destroyed, threatening the hordes as well as the harvest. Hard struggle in which the solar hero is accompanied by Yoleo, his driver and inspirator, whose notable role is very similar to that of Sri Krishna in his relationship to Arjuna. See the Bhagavad Gita, the Song of the Lord. Even though this magnificent task can be interpreted as work of improvement on a marshy delta such as that of the sacred Nile, this many-sided hydra is also an allegorical image clearly personifying the mind together with all its psychological defects. As a constellation, such a symbolic hydra has its forepart between Leo and Cancer, extending towards the south as far as the shining feet of Virgo. With burning coal, Yoleo burns the heads that are reborn in place of those that Hercules crushes with his mace, after which, the hero having cut off the immortal head, extraordinary symbol of authentic love, he hides it under a rock that obviously takes on the role of the philosopher's stone of his life, regenerated and exquisite in its spiritual way. It is written with characters of fire in the book of life, he who wants to ascend must first descend. Each exaltation is always preceded by a terrible humiliation. Unquestionably, I yearn truly and with the whole strength of my soul, to ascend to the heaven of Mercury, the devotion of the Hindustani, the superior mental world, the abode of the archangels. However, before this it was indispensable to descend to the hells of the mind to destroy there the Hydra of Lerna. Those psychological defects of many-sided structure that in the lunar hells had been reduced to cosmic dust, continued to exist like the abominable heads of the fatal Hydra, in the diverse folds of the mind. Horrifying animal-like creatures, abysmal revolting abortions, clearly personified each of my own psychological defects. One can have the luxury of understanding every psychological error, without having actually captured its deep meaning. Unquestionably, we need with maximum urgency not only to understand, but also to capture the deep meaning of that which we want to eliminate. It is only possible to eliminate the heads, psychological defects, of the Hydra of Lerna by means of the transcendent sexual electricity, during the Sahaja Methuna in the forge of the Cyclops. Since the metaphysical copulation in the 9th sphere is a form of prayer, I begged at that time to Devi Kundalini. Gerda, the great German initiate, worshipping his divine mother Kundalini, cried in full ecstasy. Virgin pure in heavenly sheen, Mother throned supernal, highest birth, our chosen queen, Godhead's pure eternal, yearning to die in himself here and now, during the chemical coitus, that great poet said, arrows pierce me, lances conquer me, maces hurt me, everything should disappear, everything should vanish. Let the perennial star shine, the focus of eternal love. Unquestionably, I always proceeded in a very similar manner, and the Hydra of Lerna, little by little, slowly, started to lose each of its abominable heads. On a certain occasion, finding myself in a monastery in the Oriental Tibet, I had the idea of telling my divine mother Kundalini the following: you and I talk and appear to be two different persons, however, we are the same being. It is not too much to assert emphatically that the answer was certainly extraordinary. Yes, my son. You and I are the same being, but a derivative. In the name of the truth, I frankly confess that without the immediate help of my adorable divine mother, there is no way in which I would have been able to radically eliminate the Hydra of Lerna. My psychological defects in the intellectual subconscious. Before the golden flame can burn with a serene light, the lamp must be well taken care of in a place free from the wind. The worldly thoughts must fall down dead at the doors of the temple. The mind, a slave of the senses, transforms the soul into an invalid, like the boat that the wind leads astray on the waters. When the sun of midnight shone victorious in the spiritual firmament, I returned to the angelic state that I had lost in days of old and entered happily into the heaven of Mercury. Chapter 36. The heaven of Venus. Now comes the third labor of Hercules, the solar hero. I wish to refer emphatically to the capture of two animals, one of them being as delicate as the other is fast, turbulent, and menacing, the deer of Arcadia and the wild boar of Erymanthus. We can and even must identify these famous quadrupeds with the two shining southern constellations closest to the stars of Gemini, that are near the two centaurs, with which Hercules sustains a bloody fight. In the deer with feet of bronze and golden horns, sacred to Diana and contended for by Apollo, the god of fire, we can see a clear reference to the human soul, the husband of the Valkyrie, the superior Monas of theosophy. And in the terrible wild boar, more perverse than anybody, is the living symbol of all the low animal passions. It is not too much to assert at this time that I yearned very sincerely and with the whole strength of my soul to enter the heaven of Venus, the causal world, the abode of the principalities. However, it is clear that first I needed to gain some merits, to reduce the frightful boar to cosmic dust. It is necessary, before ascending to descend, every exaltation is always preceded by a terrible humiliation. It was indispensable, urgent, to descend to the Venusian hells before the ascent. It was necessary to have previous information. This, in itself, was pressing, peremptory. Precise, extraordinary indications came to me during meditation. It is clear that the initiate is always assisted. On a great table, similar to the attractive board of a chess game, instead of the well-known pieces of this game, I saw animal-like figures of revolting appearance. Unquestionably, with the help of my divine mother Kundalini, I had eliminated defects of a psychological type, whether in the astral or in the mental world. However, their causal germs went on existing inside me, here and now. In the sphere of the purest experimental psychology, we can assert the following statement: the radical elimination of any psychological defect fails absolutely when there is no dissolution of its secret cause. The extirpate from my psyche such intrinsic causes was certainly my task in the Venusian hells. It is clear that then I had to pass victorious through frightful carnal temptations, similar to those suffered by the Gnostic patriarch Saint Augustine at the foot of the cross. The Gnostic mystery is present in the quiet flight of the dove, and the sin of the world in the serpent that bites the foot of the angel who tames it. Over the eternal night of the past opens the eternal night of the tomorrow. Each hour, a germ of sin, and the symbol, the serpent and the apple. Immense is the multitude of crimes whose causal germs I had to eliminate, and even if I had 100 mouths, 100 tongues and a voice of iron, I could not enumerate them all. In the Tartarus, where the wicked are punished, I also found two old friends from my youth. One is still living, the other is already dead. It is not too much to remember those titans of ancient times that wanted to ascend up to heaven. They suffer now, chained in the abyss, because of the anger of Jupiter. There also live the insolent Lapiths, and the impudent Ixion, who made an attempt on Juno, and Perithous, who tried to abduct Persephone. In the subterranean world also lives the proud Salmonio, king of Elis, who claimed for himself divine honors, he is being a simple mortal, a vile worm from the mud of the earth. Moments before definitely abandoning the abode of Pluto, I saw something frightful, terrible, as if a huge, gigantic monster wanted to devour the whole humanity. Oh my God! Later on in those atomic hells I felt transformed. The cosmic Christ entered me and I got lost inside him. Then a multitude of mothers brought their children to me and I, full of ecstasy, said, "Let the children come to me, because theirs is the kingdom of heaven." How happy I felt with the transformed causal body. After blessing all of these tender infants, I abandoned the submerged mineral kingdom and entered victorious into the heaven of Venus, the causal world. In this way I returned to the state of the principalities that in days of old I had lost, when in the central plateau of Asia, I committed the same error as Count Zanoni. To surrender at the heavenly feet of the exquisite feminine beauty, to drink the liquor of the mandrakes, to eat of the golden apples of the garden of the Hesperides, that was indeed the above-mentioned error. However, working later on with the transcendent sexual electricity, I was able to return to the path I had abandoned in days of old. That marvelous causal world or world of the conscious will, so many times cited by Mr. Ledbetter, Annie Besant, Arthur Power, Rudolf Steiner, H.P.B., etc., is clearly terror of love and law. Undoubtedly, the heaven of Venus is not of time, and is beyond the mind. It is patent that the Akashic substance, as a natural element and vibration or tattwa, constitutes in itself the living and philosophical depth of the world of cosmic causality. The deep electric blue shines marvelous in that region and sparkles here, there, everywhere, saturating us with an exquisite spiritual voluptuousness that is indescribable. The world of natural causes is like an ocean without limits and shores. The unceasing swell of action and consequence flows and flows again there, from instant to instant. It is evident that there is no cause without effect, nor effect without cause. Every action is followed by a reaction. From every act follows always a consequence, or better, a series of consequences. In that period of my actual existence, I received much objective information which was both demonstrated and demonstrable. Example: before the orator in a certain auditorium, I present myself in front of the whole assembly. I do not know how to behave myself. I get involved in what I should not. I refute concepts. Result: the speaker, a man from the causal world, leaves, infuriated. Later on, the lecturer talks to others about my attitude, and this is in fact leads to a whole concatenated series of consequences. In the causal world, I also saw, with mystical surprise, the future that lies in wait for the planet Earth and the human creatures that live in this physical world. Dressed up in the causal body, I found myself suddenly in the interior of a great railway yard. The Gnostic movement is without doubt a train in motion. Some passengers get on at a station and get off at another. Those that reach the final destination are rare. Later on, I had to submerge myself in the infinite starry space. I needed to investigate something in the amphitheater of the cosmic science. Surprised, in admiration, since I had not yet lost the capacity for astonishment, I could perceive with the eye of Dangma or eye of Shiva something unusual and unwanted. Before my spiritual sight the earth appeared, besieged by 12 enormous giants, black, sinister, menacing. The 12 zodiacal constellations, bringing about the definitive crystallization of the world karma. People from other worlds are aware of the great catastrophe that will take place and will come close with their ships to register or photograph the cataclysm. Here is the apocalypse of St. John, Indiana, full flight. Collision of worlds. Oh my God! It is timely to cite in this place some extraordinary verses from the Quran 20. Among the signs that must precede the arrival of the last hour is that of the moon, which will split in two. But in spite of this, the unbelievers will not trust their eyes. It is obvious that this in no way can refer to a geological or physical division of our neighboring satellite. This should be interpreted in a political and military way. The great powers will fight over the moon. On the day when the first trumpet resounds, when the earth and the mountains will be taken in the air and crushed with one single strike, when heaven will be split asunder and will fall down in pieces, that day will be the inevitable day. Collision. That is the precise term. The planet Earth will collide with another world that is approaching dangerously. This is the strike. That will be the day of the final judgment. Those who have deeds weighing heavily in the balance will have a pleasant life. Those who can only show light deeds will have for abode the burning pit, the infernal worlds. When the earth is shaken with her final earthquake, when it has vomited the dead that rest in its entrails, that day mankind will be prepared for judgment. The sun will be torn, the stars will fall, the mountains will move and end up crashing to the ground. Heaven will burst into 1,000 pieces and the seas and rivers will confound their waters. The graves will open, and the dead will resurrect. Those who have practiced righteousness will have happiness without limits, but the reprobates will be punished without measure. Unquestionably, before the inevitable collision, the excessive approximation of that planetary mass will give rise to frightful electromagnetic storms. It is clear that the presence of that sidereal world will exert an attraction over the liquid fire in the interior of our globe. Then the igneous element will look for a way to get out, giving rise to innumerable volcanoes. At that time the earth will shudder with terrible earthquakes and frightful seaquakes. Villages and cities will fall down fatally like castles made of playing cards, become ruins. Monstrous waves never seen before will beat with fury the sandy beaches, and a very strange sound will rise up from the bottom of the sea. Undoubtedly, the extraordinary radiation of that planet will kill 1,000,000 creatures, and everything will be destroyed in an apocalyptic holocaust. Peter or Pater, the great Hierophant, said, "But the day of the Lord will come like a thief, and then the heavens will pass away with a loud noise, and the elements will be dissolved with fire, and the earth and the works that are upon it will be burned up." In the causal world I contemplated with mystical surprise the great catastrophe that was approaching, and since this is the region of the ineffable music, the vision was illustrated in the current of sound. A certain delicious tragic symphony resonated among the deep depths of the heaven of Venus. That score amazed, in general, by its grandeur and majesty, and by the inspiration and beauty of its plan, by the purity of its lines and the coloring and nuances of its wise and artistic instrumentation, sweet and stern, grandiose and frightful, dramatic and mournful at the same time. The melodic fragments, leitmotifs, that have been heard in the causal world, in the different prophetic situations, are of great expressive power, and are in intimate relationship with the great event and the historical incidents that inevitably will precede them. There are in the score of this great cosmic opera symphonic fragments related to the Third World War, delicious and unfortunate sonorities, horrifying happenings, atomic bombs, frightful radioactivity in the whole earth, hunger, total destruction of the great metropolis, unknowns illnesses, unceasing fights here and there, etc., etc., etc. Intermixed with an art without precedent, they listen to themes related to the destruction of New York, Paris, London, Moscow, etc., etc., etc. Chapter 37. The Solar Heaven. The next labor of Hercules, the solar hero, is the cleaning of the famous stables of Augeas, king of Elis, whose daughter, who knew about the virtues of plants, made magical beverages with them. In these stables, living symbolic representation of our own submerged subconscious depths, that housed his innumerable herds, those multiple bestial psychic aggregates that constitute the ego, and among them 12 simple bulls, symbolizing the zodiacal karma, the dirt of several generations had accumulated. Unquestionably, Hercules had to clean these stables in one single day. Old traditions lost in the night of the centuries say that he achieved this by making a hole in the wall and diverting the course of a river so that its waters flooded them. This unusual task can, therefore, be identified with Aquarius, zodiacal house of Uranus, Uranus, the primordial fire and water, clearly symbolizing the sexual currents in the human organism. Uranus, as first divine king of the primitive Atlantis, is the regent of our sexual glands. Uranus, the Ahura Mazda, is actually the first to reveal the mysteries of life and death. He is certainly Uranus, the primeval fire and water, who determines intrinsically the first moon-solar cult of the androgynous Io. Io Patar is the sun, Menes or Mani is the moon. Om Mani Padme Hum as a mantra of immense esoteric power has its equivalence in the gods sun and moon, in the innermost recess of the sacred lotus emerging miraculously from the spermatic waters of the first instant. The legend of the centuries says that Uranus had 45 children from several women, and that besides them he had from Titia other 18 children. These received the collective name of Titans because of their mother. Adding separately each of these Kabbalistic quantities, we obtain the following results. 45, 4 plus 5 equals 9. The Hermit of the Tarot, the ninth sphere, the sex. 18, 1 plus 8 equals 9. The Arcanum 18 is the twilight of the Tarot. It includes the Arcanum 9 twice. It implies the secret, occult enemies, the underground fight in the domains of the ninth sphere, the dark. In fact, Uranus was the absolute king of the sexual functions, the leader of the new Aquarian age. Since Titia surpassed all women in beauty and virtues, she was included among the numbers of the gods. We have been told that her faithful devotees, thankful for all the benefits received, named her Earth. In the name of truth, I must confess frankly and openly that the fourth labor turned out to be tremendously easy for me. However, I had to pass through a delicate test. In an old park of the city, I saw myself talking to a noble lady, somebody that was doubtless a great friend. We were sitting very close on a bench, feeling a great mutual love. For an instant we appeared to be lovers, but suddenly I remembered my divine mother Kundalini. Then I diverted this current of love towards the interior and upper regions, towards my adorable mother. At that instant I said with all the strength in my soul, "This love is for my mother." In this way Hercules diverted the course of a river so that its waters would flood the stables of Augeas. Let those who have understanding understand, because here there is wisdom. Unquestionably, I was submerged inside the mineral entrails of the sun, in the solar hells. How clean they appeared to me, these submerged worlds of the King Star. Hells without souls in penance, without demons. What marvels! It is clear that demons could not live among the living entrails of the shining sun. They could never resist the potent vibration of this star. When I found myself locked up inside one of those symbolic stables of Augeas, I found it completely clean and with no animals of any kind. Then I understood. I wanted to get out, but the door was hermetically sealed. "Open sesame," I shouted with all my strength. At that moment the doors opened as if by magic, and then I entered a second stable. I found it as clean as the first. "Open sesame," I shouted again, and when the doors opened, I entered a third stable. In fact, this was also clean and beautiful. "Open sesame," I shouted for the fourth time, and when the fourth door opened, I crossed the threshold of a bright solar mansion. What I saw at the far end of the sanctuary was something unusual and unwanted. Oh, gods! There, sitting on their thrones, Osiris, Isis, and Horus were waiting for me. I advanced towards them and prostrating myself I adored them. At that moment I felt their blessings in me. Three aspects of my being, but derivative. Thus, I understood it, and this deserves an explanation. One of our esoteric Gnostic rituals says textually the following. Osiris, the Arch-Hierophant and Archmagus, our particular, individual monad, powerful emperor, answers the imploring sun. Isis, the unfolding of Osiris, the mystical duality, Devi. Kundalini, dignified mother, answers the imploring sun. Horus, the intimate Christ, answers the imploring pilgrim. They received me, and I entered victorious into the solar heaven, into the abode of the potencies, into the Buddhic or intuitional world. Then I regained my place among those divine creatures, a glorious state of consciousness that I had lost in days of old. Chapter 38. The Heaven of Mars. The fifth labor of Hercules, the solar hero, was the hunting and killing of the cannibalistic birds living in the lakes of Stymphalus 22, who killed people with their bronzed feathers, throwing them like deadly arrows at their defenseless victims. This labor is clearly and intimately related to the constellation of Pisces, house of Neptune, the lord of practical magic. Unquestionably, those cannibalistic birds are the cruel harpies cited by Virgil, the poet of Mantua. For the good of the great cause, for which all of us, the brothers of the Gnostic movement, are fighting for, I am now going to transcribe a few paragraphs from the Aeneid. We struck our sails, we strained at the oars, our mariners quickly made the foam fly with their hard stroke, sweeping the dark blue sea. It was the coast of the Strophades that rose to welcome me. Preserved from the waves, Strophades being the Greek name for those islands in the broad Ionian Sea where dreadful Seleno and her coven of harpies, horrible witches, black Jinn, dwell, now the house of Phineus is barred and in fear they have left their pristine banquets. No viler monstrosity than they, no pest more atrocious did ever the wrath of God conjure up out of hell's swamp. Bird-bodied, girl-faced things they are, abominable their droppings, their hands are talons, their faces haggard with hunger insatiable. When we had made our landfall and entered port, we observed abundant herds of cattle dotted over the vale and goat flocks browsing there without any goatherd by them. We slaughtered some, we invited Jove and the other gods to take their share of the spoil. Then, by the winding shore seated on makeshift benches, we are most richly feasting. But, the next moment, we hear a hoarse vibration of wing beats. The harpies, witches, are on us, horribly swooping down from the mountains. They tear the banquet to pieces, filthening all with their bestial touch. Hideous the sounds, nauseous the stench about us. We choose a secluded spot under an overhanging crag, enclosed by trees and their shifting shadows, to set up our tables again and light a fire on a new altar. Again, from their hidden lairs, flying in from different angles, that noisy coven claws at the feast, hovering around it, their mouths tainting the meat, those cannibalistic birds. So, then I order my friends, stand to arms, for we must fight this damnable brood. They did as they were ordered. They hid their swords in the grass ready to hand and put their shields out of sight beside them. So, when the creatures again came screeching round the bay, Maecenas, from an observation post above us, blew the alarum. My friends went into an unfamiliar combat, trying their steel on sinister birds of the sea. But blows did not make them turn a feather. Their bodies would not be wounded. They simply flew off at high speed into the blue, leaving a half-devoured feast and their own disgusting traces. Salino alone, perching upon a rock pinnacle, stayed behind, and broke into speech, a fortune-teller of evil. So you're willing to go to war, sons of Laomedon, over the cattle you slaughtered, over slain bullocks? Prepared to drive us innocent harpies out of our rightful domain? Very well, take these words to heart, and never forget them. What the Father Almighty foreshadowed to Phoebus Apollo, and he to me, will I, the chief of the Furies, reveal you. You are making all speed for Italy, and the winds won over. To Italy you shall go, even enter port you may. But, before you can wall your promised city, outrageous famine shall fasten upon you, in return for trying to kill us, and force you to chew your tables, yes, gnaw at them and devour them. She spoke. She winged away into the sheltering forest. As for my friends, their blood went cold with the shock of panic and curdled. Their hearts sank. No more fighting, they said. Through vows and prayers alone we must seek security, whether those creatures are of heaven or uncanny birds of ill omen. Anchises stretched out his hands from the shore in supplication to the powers above, appointing due sacrifice in their honor. Ye gods, prevent these threats. Ye gods, avert this calamity. Incline your hearts to the faithful. Oh, save us. Then he gave orders to cast off the moorings, to free the sheets and pay them out. This is the end of this unusual occult and esoteric story. Let us continue now with the explanations. Many of these abysmal harpies, caught red-handed, have been captured by means of certain procedures. Some ancient traditions say, if we put on the floor a pair of steel scissors open to form a cross, and if we spill black mustard around this metallic instrument, any witch can be caught. It is astonishing that some illustrious occultists ignore that these witches can avoid the universal law of gravity. Even if it may sound unusual, we assert solemnly that this is possible by putting the physical body into the fourth dimension. It is in no way strange that these witches and their drones, living with their physical body in the fourth vertical, hyperspace, can levitate and travel in a few seconds anywhere in the world. In fact, they have secret formulas to escape physically from this three-dimensional world of Euclid's. In strictly occultist terms, we can well qualify these sinister and dark harpies by the title of black jinn, to differentiate them radically from the white jinn. The human organism put into the fourth dimension, in spite of everything that official science may say, can assume any figure, change shape. Remember, beloved readers, the execrable Selenio and his dirty harpies, horrible birds from the islands of Stymphalus, in the Ionic Sea. One evening, no matter which date, day, or time, I was seated near some railings in an old dungeon, studying an esoteric work. The sun was hiding among the red fires of the sunset, and the evening light was slowly disappearing. Suddenly, something unusual happens. I hear next to me a sarcastic, loud, mocking guffaw, markedly feminine. It was one of these cannibalistic birds inhabiting the lakes of Stymphalus, a witch. Of ill omen, a woman of sinister witches' Sabbaths. The depraved woman runs away and hides among the frightful shadows of the infernal worlds. Here starts my intrepid descent among the living entrails of the submerged Martian mineral kingdom. Before ascending, it is indispensable to descend, it is the law. Each exaltation is preceded by a frightful and terrible humiliation. To annihilate inside myself those inhuman elements, which, like those birds of ill omen, was certainly my task in the dark Tartarus. Even if it appears incredible, it is urgent to realize that all human beings, without exception, have in their unconscious depths varied magic elements. This means that in the world there are many people that, without knowing it, unconsciously practice black magic. Unquestionably, even the saints of every religion suffer something indescribable when they discover this trait in themselves. Then they can verify by themselves the crude realism of those inhuman elements that in fact they are obliged to eliminate from their psyches. Any adept or mystic or saint, provided that he has not radically died in each and every one of the 49 departments of the subconscious, is more or less black. Here is one of the great motives why we should not condemn anybody. He that is without sin among you, let him first cast a stone at her. At that time of my life, I was attacked unceasingly and in a merciless way by the sinister birds that inhabit the lakes of Stymphalus. At the meeting places of sinister witches' Sabbaths in the Martian hells, I found, astonished, many brothers of the stony path. They were in fact witch-like aggregates, clearly ignored by their human personalities. Once I was finished with my work in the mineral abysses of Mars, I ascended victorious to the fifth heaven, the world of Atman, the radiant abode of the virtues. Thus, I returned to the heaven of Mars, then I regained my place among these sublime beings, a divine position lost a long time ago. The objective of my work in the Martian hells had been achieved. Having eliminated from my psyche the inhuman elements, my consciousness was free. The intellectual shackles had been annihilated and my consciousness liberated, having left that horrible prison of the mind where for such a long time it had been a prisoner. It had managed to fuse, to merge, with Atman, the ineffable, my real being. Ah, if people could understand what the prison of the intellect actually is, if they understood that they live as a prisoner in the jail of the mind. In complete happiness as spirit man in the Martian heaven, far from the body, from the affections and from the mind, I walked consciously as a shining bird of light, radical antithesis of those sinister birds from the lakes of Stymphalus. At such moment of exquisite happiness, I had to pass next to many symbolic works constructed from pure iron. This is the region of Atman, the ineffable, the world of the crudest realism, the dimension of mathematics. In the three-dimensional world of Euclid's we never perceive a solid in an integral manner, as a totality. Here we only see angles, surfaces, etc., in a subjective way. However, in the brilliant region of Atman, we not only perceive solids in an integral way, but also hypersolids, including the exact quantity of atoms that together constitute the entirety of any body. Unquestionably, in the heaven of Mars we actually enjoy the most complete objective perception. How happy I felt in that region of infinite bliss! However, not everything in life is a party, there are also sufferings. You know that. The seat of the celestial judgment, where the objective justice is administered, always intervenes. One day, when I was happy in the world of Atman, a judge of the law of the Katansia, superior karma, approached me. He sat at a table and I, with much respect and veneration, had then to answer some charges. You have criticized many people in your books, said the hierarch. I am by nature combative, I answered in an emphatic manner. You are condemned to 7 days in prison, such was the sentence. I have to confess frankly that when I heard the sentence, I felt slightly cynical. It appeared to me that this was a silly police case, such as that when one is a lad fight with another of the same age and gets sent to jail for a few hours. However, already in full fulfillment of the sentence, I felt that this punishment was very painful. 7 days in the horrible jail of the mind, and after having already been emancipated. 7 symbolic days of bitterness inside the frightful jail of the intellect. Oh my God! Chapter 39. The Heaven of Jupiter. Nearly adjacent to the brilliant constellation of Pisces we find that of Taurus, which is unquestionably related in an intimate way with the esoteric transcendent work, the capture of the Cretan bull. This animal had been sent to Minos by the god Neptune to be offered as a holocaust, but the king greedily, improperly kept the bowl for himself, and then the animal became frightful and menacing, terrorizing the whole country. The legend of the centuries says that Hercules, the solar hero, easily obtained permission to seize, chain and drag it along the sea towards Mycenae. It is indubitable that the work associated with the hells of Jupiter is allegorized fully by the sixth labor of Hercules. It is not too much to remember in these pages the first Jupiter of the Greek theogony, father of all the gods, lord of the universe and brother of Uranus, Uranus, that is, of the primitive fire and water, since it is known, according to classical lore, that in the Greek pantheon there are around 300 Jupiters. In his other aspect of Jove or Iadiv, he is the male and female Jehovah, or androgynous and collective Elohim of the Mosaic books, Adam Kadmon of the Kabbalists, the Iacho or Inacho of the Anatolia, who is also the Bacchus or Dionysus of the Phoenicians who continued the primitive theogony of Sanconiaton. The character always assigned to Jupiter, that of the venerable father of the gods, as celestial man, gave rise also to not a few Nordic names, such as the Hermann and Hermanus or Hermes, literally the divine man or lord man, Alcides or El Cid, theogonic precursor of all our prehistoric Cids of the Romancero 24. Unquestionably Jupiter, in the Punjab and the Rajasthan, is Hercules or Hercules, the solar lord, the prototype of the solar race, the Hari Muk of Kashmir, that is, the sun on the horizon of life. Jupiter or Iopatar, that is, the father of Io, is the divine spirit of that ancient multitude of creators who, when reincarnated into bodies of the opposite sex, gave rise to the Greek fable of the loves of Jupiter with the virgin Io, who was transformed into a celestial calf or sacred cow of the Orientals, thus, to escape the anger of Juno. Jupiter and his cow of Io provide us with the meaning of another set of archaic names, such as the same Geryon or Phrygian, the one who herded the cows, that of Hyperion Bosphorus, literally the conductor of cows, and even Gautama the Buddha. In this way, the multitude of the lords or Elohim Jupiter are symbolized by the sexual hierogram of Io. It is clear that they have dozens of names in each tongue and 100 or even 1,000 of myths for each of these names in the respective tongues. The whole of this ineffable legion of divine beings, all of these Elohim constitute, as an ensemble, the nameless, single god of the Tartessians, the authentic sublime Jupiter of ancient times. By developing very carefully this transcendental theme, we can solemnly deduce the following. The heaven of Jupiter is the abode of the Elohim, Nirvana. Those devotees of the path who, when arriving at the fifth initiation of fire, choose the spiral path, will enter Nirvana. Integral development is different. In the name of the truth, I must confess frankly that this was always my main yearning. The full development of all my superlative, nirvanic possibilities in the presence of my cosmic being was my aspiration. However, it is unquestionable that before ascending we must descend. Every exaltation must be preceded by an awful and terrible humiliation. To chain the symbolic bull of Crete was really the task to follow, and this appeared to me to be horrible. At that time of my actual existence, many severe sexual temptations were besieging me in the sinister Tartarus. By exploring myself in a psychological manner, I discovered in the most profound depths of own mind the famous bull of Crete. I saw it, yes, black, enormous, gigantic, menacing, and with sharp horns. It was obviously impressing itself in my psyche with passionate, unthinking, strong sexual impulses. It was urgent to chain the beast, it was indispensable to disintegrate it, reduce it to cosmic dust. Undoubtedly, my divine mother Kundalini, the igneous serpent of our magic powers, assisted me. This great cosmic event was celebrated by a party, which took place in the marvelous temple of Jupiter. Then many kings and priests of nature, dressed up in the sacred purple, welcomed me. Thus, I went back into the heaven of Jupiter, the abode of the dominations, the nirvanic happiness. In this way, by eliminating infrahuman elements, I reconquered my place among these ineffable hierarchies, a state of consciousness that I had lost a long time ago, when in the central plateau of Asia, about 1,000,000 years ago, I committed the error of eating from the forbidden fruit. Chapter 40. The Heaven of Saturn. The seventh labor of Hercules, the solar hero, is the capture of the Maras of Diomedes, son of Mars and king of the warlike country of the Bistums, that used to kill and eat the shipwrecked that reached those shores. Hercules and his companions managed to get hold of those beasts only after a ferocious combat with the Bistons who had come with Diomedes to defend their possessions, who they defeated, the king being left as food for the man-eating females. In the hells of Saturn, I had to capture and destroy the Maras of Diomedes, infrahuman elements full of passion deeply submerged into my own unconscious depths. Symbolic beasts next to the spermatic waters of the first instant, always ready to devour the failures. At that time of my actual existence, I was unceasingly attacked in the gloomy Tartarus. The adepts of the Atlantean magic decided to fight me with unprecedented ferocity, and I had to defend myself powerfully. Adorable nubile ladies, exquisitely dangerous and malignant beauties, besieged me everywhere. Unquestionably in the Saturnine hells we experience, live and relive, the Atlantean terrors. Hercules as Alienus, several stories, Book V, C.3, says cleansed the earth and the seas from a whole genre of monstrosities, if not of monsters, defeating the necromancer Briareus, the one with the 100 arms, in one of his famous labors or triumphs over the Atlantean magic that had taken over the whole earth. Hercules, the true Aryan Krishna of the Mahabharata, having the presentiment of the final Atlantean catastrophe that was coming, and with it the disappearance of the divine garden of the Hesperides, transplanted wherever he went, that is to the whole of the Punjab, Asia Minor, Syria, Egypt, Greece, Italy, Germany, the British Isles, Spain, Mauritania, and even America, under the name of Quetzalcoatl, the luminous white serpent, the symbolic initiatory tree that would save all these countries from the catastrophes. However, it is written, "You may freely to eat of every tree of the garden, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, for in the day when you eat of it you shall die." As Hercules taught, it is indispensable to get intoxicated with the delicious fragrance of the forbidden fruit. Within sight of the barrier of the ocean, impassable for man, Hercules, full of titanic defiance, stretched his bow against the sun, as if to hurt it so as to stop it in its swift race beyond the sea in which it was going to hide and to where he could not follow. But the god Apollo ordered him to be quiet and stay patient, because only with infinite patience the magnus opus, the great work, can be carried out, and in recompense for this behavior he gave him a golden cup, the Holy Grail, glowing eternal symbol of the feminine uterus or yoni. It is unquestionable that the arrow of Hercules is nothing but the Magnus stone, the phallus or lance of Longinus, with which the Roman centurion wounded the side of the Lord, the same holy pike by means of whose secret power Parsifal healed the wound on the side of Amphortas. By means of the miraculous powers of these venerable relics, I defeated in bloody battles the king of the Bistums, the knights of the Black Grail, Klingsor, the animal ego. When the Saturnine work in the abode of Pluto was finished, I was then transported in the Eidolon to the solar land of the Hyperboreans. This is the island of Avalon, the magic Jinn region where the holy gods live. Sublime island of Apollo, firm ground in the middle of the ocean of the great life free in its movement. Ah! If Emperor Frederick in the Middle Ages had fulfilled in himself the mystery of the Grail, the Hyperborean mystery, it is indubitable that then the dry tree of the empire would have flourished again in a splendid manner. It is clear that the kingdom of the Grail would have reappeared, marvelous, in the same sacred Roman Empire. The path of life is formed with the footprints of the hooves of the horse of death. It is not possible to fulfill in oneself the Hyperborean mystery without having been judged in the immense hall of the truth justice. It is not possible to fulfill inside oneself the mystery of the Grail without having weighed beforehand the heart of the deceased on the plate of the balance carried by the truth justice. The intimate self-realization of being is not possible without having been declared dead in the hall of the truth justice. The legend of centuries says that many initiates traveled in the past to the country of Prester John the Solar Land to receive a certain magic esoteric consecration of a very special kind. These brothers of the Order of St. John Indiana, the island of the solar Apollo, are indeed dead. It is not strange, then, that I also had to travel to the land of light or solar land. In the glorious vestibule of the Saturnine sancta, before the royal beings, I had to sit down and answer certain questions. The holy gods took notes in a grand book. At that mystical moment, some remembrances came forth, in the full presence of my cosmic being. Ah! I had been there before, and in the same holy place before the venerable thrones, many millions of years ago, in the epoch of the continent Mu or Lemuria. Now I was returning victorious after having suffered much. Oh my God! Having fulfilled the essential esoteric requirements, I left the vestibule and entered the temple. Unquestionably, the temple of Saturn in the solar land, Jin land, of the northern regions, was full of intense darkness. It is a fact that the Sun and Saturn alternate their work in the government of the world. And I saw thrones. And they sat down. The angels of death went back and forth, here and there. Divine people arrived at the temple. They came from several places in the enchanted island situated at the end of the world. Thuli Ultima, a Solnilm Habens. Adrianum Vajo, the northern country of the ancient Persians, where the palace of King Arthur is magically located like the Midgard, the shining sacrosanct abode of the Aces, the ineffable lords of the north. Oh, Mott! Here I am, arriving before you. Let me contemplate your shining beauty. Look, my arm is raised at your sacrosanct name. Oh, truth justice, listen. I arrive at the places where the trees do not grow, where the soil does not allow the plants to spring up. The skeletal figure of the god of death, on the dais of the sanctuary, weighed my heart in the balance of cosmic justice, before the divine humanity. That verb of potency declared me dead before the shining beings dressed in the glorious bodies of Camuar. On the stage of the sanctuary, a symbolic coffin could be seen, inside which my corpse had appeared. In this manner I returned to the heaven of Saturn, the Parinirvana, the abode of the thrones. In this manner I regained that hierarchic status that I had lost a long time ago, when I committed the serious error of eating from the golden apples of the garden of the Hesperides. Later on, I went through the death ceremony. When I returned home, I found something unusual. I saw funeral posters on the walls of my house, announcing my death and inviting to my burial. When I crossed the threshold, I found with mystical surprise a very beautiful white coffin. It is clear that inside that funeral box was my body, totally cold and inert. Many relatives and mourners cried and wept bitterly around that coffin. Delicious flowers perfumed with their scent the ambience of that room. I approached my mother, who at that time was drying her tears with a handkerchief. I kissed her hands with infinite love and said, I thank you, oh, mother, for the physical body you have given me. This vehicle has been very helpful, and it certainly is a marvelous instrument, but everything in life has a beginning and an end. When I left that planetary abode, I happily decided to float inside the aura of the universe. I saw myself become a child, with no ego, devoid of the subjective elements of perception. My small infant shoes did not look very pretty to me. For a moment I wanted to take them off, but then I told myself, he will dress me up as he wishes. In the absence of the mortifying intellect, which makes nobody happy, only the purest sentiment existed in me. And when I remembered my old father and my brother German, I told myself, they are already dead. And at the moment of remembering all those suffering people that I was leaving in the painful valley of samsara, I said, family? Which one? I have no family. Feeling absolutely discarnate, I left with the intention of arriving at a remote place where I should help others. At such a moment of mystical enchantment, I told myself, I will not take a physical body again for a long time. Later on I felt that the silver cord, the famous Antakarana, the thread of life, had not yet been broken. Then I had to return to the physical body to continue with the hard struggle of every moment. Chapter 41. The Heaven of Uranus. The legend of countless centuries says that Aeneas the self-satisfied Trojan sat down with King Evander and the venerable senators at the table of the banquet. The slaves served all kinds of dishes and poured the sweet wine, and when the desire for food and drink had been satisfied, King Evander explained to his guest that the ceremony in honor of Hercules, whose celebration had just been finished when they arrived, was no superstition, but a ritual that was owed to the god because nearby was the place of one of his greatest feats, the cavern where he killed the thief Cacus. One could see nearby an enormous rampart, covered in stones that appeared to have been thrown down by an earthquake. Beneath them was the opening that led to the cavern where Cacus took refuge and where the son of Jupiter cornered him, throwing stones and logs as a punishment for having tried to steal his herds. After this explanation by King Evander, a choir of adolescents intoned a eulogy of Hercules and his great feats. It enumerated all his labors, how he strangled the Hydra of Lerna, how he killed the lion of Nemea, and how he fetched up Cerberus, the hound from hell, from the darkness to the light. The sexual instinct that must guide us until the final liberation. Once the songs and ceremonies were finished, the old king, walking slowly due to his age, made for the city of Pallanteum, where he had his throne, and walked supported by two young men, his son Pallas and Aeneas. While the three were walking, they amused themselves by conversing, and the king explained to Aeneas that the name of Latium, the place where the city was, came from ancient times when Cronos, the father of Jupiter, took refuge there to escape from the enemies who defended the cause of his son once he had overthrown him. Then the Age of Gold started, followed by the Age of Iron, where the anger of war and the frenzy to possess predominated. The country started to be invaded by people of different origins. Walking, Evander showed Aeneas the forest and the locations where in the future the heroic deeds of the new Rome would take place, the place where the impetuous Romulus would carry out his feats, the capital, now a square covered in gold and marbles, then a clearing in the forest full of weeds and brambles, and the Tarpeian rock, from where the Roman justice casts down the traitors to the fatherland. Scattered ruins showed monuments from other ages, and some stones lifted by Janus and others by Saturn gave their name to two places, Januculum and Satenia. This is taken from the Aeneid by Virgil, the poet from Mantua, the good master of the Florentine Dante. Jesus, the great Kabir, was crucified between two thieves, one to his right and the other to his left. Agatus, the good thief inside us, steals the sexual hydrogen C12 of the creative organs with the evident objective of crystallizing the Holy Ghost, the great comforter inside ourselves, here and now. Cacus, the evil thief, hidden inside the dark cave of the human infraconsciousness, steals, treacherously, the sexual center of the organism for the satisfaction of brutal animal passions. The cross is a surprising, marvelous and formidable sexual symbol. The vertical pole is masculine, the horizontal, feminine. In the crossing of both members lies the key to all power. The black lingam, inserted into the feminine yoni, forms a cross. This is well known by divines and by humans. We can and must assert as a corollary the following postulate: Agatus and Cacus, crucified in the Mount of the Skulls, at the left and right of the great Kabir, emphatically allegories the white and the black tantrism, the good and evil sexual magic. The Bible, from the Genesis to the Apocalypse, is nothing but a series of historic annals of the great struggle between the henchmen of Agatus and Cacus, between white and black magic, between the adepts of the right-hand path, the prophets, and those of the left-hand path, the Levites. In the abyss of Uranus, I had to reduce to cosmic dust the evil thief, the sinister Cacus, the same one who had previously stolen the sexual center from my organic machine for the base satisfaction of animal passions. When I entered the vestibule of the sanctuary, I remembered to have been there before. In ancient times. With the eye of Shiva, I saw in the future diverse tantric movements of Aquarius, among which the Gnostic people stood out, whose flags waved victorious in all the countries of the world. Unquestionably, Uranus, Aquarius, is 100% sexual, magic, revolutionary. In this way, I re-entered the heaven of Uranus, the Mahaparinirvana, the abode of the cherubims. In this way I reconquered that brilliant state of consciousness that I had lost in days of old, when I fell defeated at the feet of the marvelous Eve of the Hebraic mythology. Chapter 42. The Heaven of Neptune. The ninth labor of Hercules, the solar hero, unquestionably turns out to be very complex, taking the girdle of Hippolyte, queen of the Amazons, the feminine psychic aspect of our own interior nature. When embarking with other legendary heroes, first he had to fight with the sons of Minos the Black Sorcerers, Then with the enemies of King Lycus, whose exotic name reminds us of the analogy between the wolf and the light. It is a question, therefore, of the lords of karma, with whom we must transact some business, and finally with the Amazon's terrible temptresses stirred up by Hera. Even though Hippolyte had agreed to give her girdle peacefully, the queen is thus uselessly sacrificed by masculine brutality that pretends to take hold violently of her innate virtue. That marvelous girdle, analogous to that of Venus and an emblem of femininity, loses its meaning and worth when it is separated from its legitimate owner. Love and not violence makes, therefore, its conquest really significant and worthwhile. Having traveled around the coast of the Atlantic continent, the god Neptune, submerged now in the stormy waters of the ocean that bears his name, is said by tradition to have engendered several children with a mortal woman. Everything was flat on the island where he lived, but in its middle, there was a very special valley, with a small central hill 50 stadia 26 from the sandy beach. On that hill lived one of those great beings born on earth, called Evener, who had engendered in his wife Leucippe his only daughter, Cleito. When the parents of Cleito died, Neptune married her, and enclosed the hill where she lived with several trenches with water, of which, according to the legend of centuries, 3 came from the sea and were equidistant from the ocean, walling in the hill to make it unconquerable and inaccessible. This Cleito or Minervaneth built Athens in Greece and Sais in the famous delta of the Nile. In memory of all this, the Atlanteans built the marvelous temple of Neptune and Cleito. In this sancta, the bodies of the 10 children of Neptune, a symbolic magical number, were deposited. We cannot leave the study of the magic number 10 without referring to the biblical obligation of the tithe, to which Abraham subjected himself voluntarily, in his relations with the initiate king Melchizedek. According to the chapter 14 of Genesis 27, the king of Sodom went out to meet him, Abraham. And Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. He was a priest of the God Most High, blessed him and said, "Blessed be Abraham by God Most High, maker of heaven and earth, and blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand." And Abraham gave him 1/10 of everything. In its exoteric or public aspect, the obligation of the tithe in Jewish legislation is the universal duty that all the brothers of the path have of contributing faithfully with a part of their income. It must not be less than 1/10 in such a manner freely chosen that they consider to be the most appropriate and effective way to sustain the cause of truth and justice. In its esoteric or secret aspect, the tithe symbolizes the balance of payments in the sphere of Neptune. It is unquestionable that there we must settle our accounts with the enemies of King Lycus, the lords of karma. It is indubitable that all of us assassinate the god Mercury, Hiram, and it is not possible to resuscitate him inside ourselves before paying up for the abject crime. Therefore, the tithe becomes a practical and necessary complement to the dynamical principle that originates from the deep study of the 10th commandment, that is, consider as a source, fountain, and spiritual providence of the whole interior and divine center of our life the mysterious Ayad that is hidden in the middle of the central delta of the sanctuary of our being. This point concerning the tithe is clarified by the evangelic words, Matthew 6:19-21, "Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust consume and where thieves break in and steal, but lay up for yourselves treasure in heaven, where neither moth nor rust consumes, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be." The 3rd chapter of Malachi says, "Bring the full tithes into the storehouse, that there may be food in my house, and thereby put me to the test, says the Lord of hosts, if I will not open the windows of heaven for you and pour down for you an overflowing blessing." 28. Excavating in the profound entrails of the Avern, intensely working in the 9th sphere, I searched with infinite yearning for the treasure of heaven, the golden fleece of the ancients. The children of Minos, the adepts of the left hand, the Levites of all ages, angrily and unceasingly attacked me in the frightful abyss of Neptune. During that hard struggle I yearned to conquest the girdle of Hippolyte, but the Amazons, stirred up by Hera, besieged me unceasingly with their subtle charms of the abyss. A particular night, no matter now the date, the day, the time, I was transported to the castle of Klingsor, situated in Salamanca, Spain. It is not too much to remember that, in that old castle cited by Wagner in his Parsifal, operates the Hall of Witchcraft. Sinister, dismal witches, they attacked me many times inside the castle. However, I defended myself with valor by means of the Sword of Fire. My old friend, the angel Adonai, who at this time had a physical body, accompanied me in this adventure. They were not in vain, no, the lucubrations of those great seers of the astral known as alchemists, Kabbalists, occultists, etc. What we saw in this cavern was certainly dreadful. Many times, I unsheathed the Sword of Fire to throw flames over on the fatal abode of the necromancer Klingser. In an unwanted manner, Adonai and I approached some harpies that were setting up a table for the banquet. In vain I pierced with the sword the breast of one of these witches. She remained impassive. Unquestionably, she was awakened in evil and for evil. In fact, I wanted to make fire pour as rain over that horrendous palace. I made supreme efforts and felt that I was passing out. At that moment, Angel Adonai approached the window of my eyes to look at what was happening inside me. Imagine for a moment a person stopping before the window of a house to observe through the glass panes to see what is happening in its interior. It is clear that the eyes are the windows of the soul, and the angels of heaven can see through these panes what happens in the interior of each of us. Once he made this singular observation, Adonai left, satisfied. The intimate fire had incinerated my own interior castle, the abode of Klingser. Each one of us carries inside a palace of sinister witches' Sabbaths. The Mahatmas never ignore this. Later on, I had clear experiential evidence of the dark aspects of existence. It is clear that Satan has the gift of ubiquity. Watch him inside yourself, here, there, everywhere. Once the esoteric works in the hells of Neptune were completed, I then had to ascend to the Empyrean, the region of the seraphim, creatures of love, direct expressions of the unity. Thus, I regained that hierarchic status in the heaven of Neptune. This is the universe of the divine monads. Unquestionably, I had obtained the girdle of Hippolyte. One night I proved this in a cosmic celebration. I danced then with other ineffables. Another night, floating in the Empyrean in a seraphic state, I asked my divine mother Kundalini for the lyre. I managed to play it then with mastery. It was certainly horrifying, what I saw then in the gloomy abode of those harpies. Chapter 43. The Resurrection. It is unquestionable that for Richard Wagner, as it is generally in all Christian countries, the Grail is the sacred vessel from which the Lord of Perfection drank in his Last Supper, the divine goblet that received his real blood spilled from the cross in the Mount of the Skulls and devoutly gathered by the Roman senator Joseph of Arimathea. The great chalice was owned by the patriarch Abraham. Melchizedek, the planetary spirit of our world, transported it with infinite love to the land of Semiramis, in the country of Canaan, where he started some foundations in the place in which Jerusalem, the city beloved by the prophets, would stand later on. He used it wisely when he celebrated the sacrifice in which he offered the bread and the wine of the transubstantiation in the presence of Abraham, and he left it to this master. This holy vessel was also in Noah's Arkansas. We have been told that this venerated vessel was also taken to the sacred land of the Pharaohs, the sun-drenched land of Chem, and that Moses, the leader of the Jewish mysteries, the great Hierophant, possessed it. Very ancient millennial traditions lost in the frightening night of the ages say that this magical vessel is made out of a singular material, as compact as that of a bell, and that it does not seem to have been worked on as metals are. It appears rather to be the product of a kind of vegetation. The Holy Grail is the miraculous chalice of the supreme libation, the cup where the manna that fed the Israelites in the desert is contained, the yoni, the uterus of the eternal feminine. The exquisite wine of transcendental spirituality is contained in that vessel of delight. The conquest of the ultramare vitae, or superliminal and ultra-terrestrial world, the esoteric resurrection, would be somewhat more than impossible without sexual magic, without women, without love. The delicious verb of Isis comes out from the depths of all ages, waiting for the moment to be fulfilled. The ineffable words of the goddess Neith has been carved in golden letters on the shining walls of the Temple of Wisdom. I am the one who has been, is, and will be, and no mortal has lifted my veil. The primitive religion of Jano, or Jano, that is, the golden, solar, and superhuman doctrine of the jinn, is absolutely sexual. In the ineffable mystical idol, commonly called the delights of Good Friday, we feel in the depth of our heart that there is in the sexual organs a force that is terrifyingly divine. The Stone of Light, the Holy Grail, has the power to resuscitate Hiram Abiff, the secret master, the Sun King, inside ourselves, here and now. The Grail preserves the character of a mysterium tremendum. It is the stone fallen from the crown of Lucifer. As a frightening force, the Grail wounds and destroys the curious and the impure, but it defends and gives life to the just and the sincere. Unquestionably, the Grail can only be obtained by means of the Lance of Eros, fighting against the eternal enemies of the night. It is only possible to fulfill in oneself the Hyperborean mystery by descending into the infernal worlds. This resurrection is the true apotheosis or exaltation of what there is of most high and alive in man, his divine monad, eternal and immortal, but that was dead, hidden. Undoubtedly, the monad is, in itself, the verb, the luminous and spermatic fiat of the first moment, the Lord Shiva, the sublime husband of our divine mother Kundalini, the arch-hierophant and arch-magus, the particular superindividuality of each other. It is written with characters of fire in the book of life. To who already knows, the word gives power. Nobody has pronounced it, nobody will pronounce it, but only that one who has it incarnated. We reach the perfection in the mastery with the resurrection of the secret master in each of us. Then every one of our stains is washed away from us and the original sin is radically eliminated. I worked intensively in the super darkness of silence and the august secret of the wise men. I submerged myself in the sacred mysteries of Minna, the frightful darkness of a love that is the twin brother of death. I reclaimed my place in the first heaven, lunar, where Dante had the vision of the blessed and ecstatically recognized Piccarda Donati and the Empress Constance. I returned to my place in the second heaven of Mercury, abode of the active and beneficial spirits. I went back to the third heaven of Venus, region of the loving spirits, where Dante was engaged with Robert, the King of Naples. I returned to the fourth heaven, solar heaven, abode of the wise spirits, in which chapter Dante cites Saint Francis of Assisi. I reconquered the fifth heaven, of Mars, region of the martyrs of the faith, the chapter in which Dante mentions Cacciaguida and her elders, the old and the new Florence. I returned to the sixth heaven, of Jupiter, region of the wise and just princes. I went back to the seventh heaven, of Saturn, exquisite abode of the contemplative spirits, a magnificent chapter where the Florentine Dante mentions with great emphasis Peter Daniel and spoke against the luxury of the priests. I returned to the eighth heaven, or starry heaven, region of Uranus, immortal paragraphs where Dante mentions the triumph of the intimate Christ and of the coronation of the Divine Mother Kundalini, paradise of the triumphant spirits. I returned to the ninth heaven, or crystalline heaven, the region of Neptune, extraordinary chapter in which Dante cast his invective against the bad preachers. Later on, I had to appear before the third logos, Shiva, my real being, my own superindividuality, Samael in him. Then the Blessed One assumed a different figure, different from mine, as if he were a stranger. He had the aspect of a very respectable gentleman. The Venerable asked me to make a chiromantic study of the lines of his hand. The line of Saturn on his omnipotent right hand appeared to be very straight. Amazing, marvelous, however, in some places it appeared to be interrupted, damaged, broken. Lord, you have had many struggles, sufferings. You are mistaken, I am a very lucky man, everything always goes very well for me. Well, the point is that I see a small damage in the line of Saturn. Measure that line in a correct way. At what age do you see the damage? Lord, between the ages of 53 and 61, you had a hard time. Ah, that is at the beginning, but afterwards, what? 8 years go by very quickly, and then, the triumph that awaits you. Finished this study, the Venerable stood up and said, I like those chiromantic studies, but sporadically. My wife, Devi Kundalini, also likes them and I will soon bring her. Ah, now I have to pay you for your work. Wait for me here, that I will come back to pay you." The Blessed One went away, and I stayed waiting for him. In the far distance I saw two of my daughters, now grown-ups. However, they still appeared to be small. I got a bit worried about them, and started to call them. It is indubitable that in that epoch of my actual existence I had the above mentioned 53 years of age. In the hand of the Blessed One I had seen my own future. Evidently the 8 initiations that had been received must be accredited. Very hard work, a year for each initiation. To live now in 8 years the whole of the Book of the Patriarch Job, to pay the tithe of Neptune before the resurrection. The Book of Job is a complete representation of the ancient initiation and of the people that preceded this great ceremony. The neophyte, in this book he sees himself dispossessed of everything, even of his children, and affected by an impure illness. His wife distresses him, mocking the confidence he puts in a God that treats him in such a way, and his 3 friends Eliphaz, Bildad, Zophar, torment him, judging him to be impious, surely meriting such a punishment. Job, then, cried out for a champion, a liberator, because he knows that this one, Shiva, is eternal and is going to redeem him from the slavery of the earth, by means of the intimate resurrection, repairing his skin. Job, by divine permission, sees himself tormented, dispossessed, ill, under the cruel action of those malignant beings that Aristotle called the blackbirds, St. Paul, the cruel powers of the air, the church, the demons, Theosophy and the Kabbalah, the elementals, etc., etc., etc. However, as Job is just and sings the theme of his own justification faced with such rigors of destiny, he wins at last with the sacred it of his crucifixion in the lacerated flesh, and Jehovah, the interior iadhev of each one, allows the healing angels, or jinn, to treat him. Their classic leader, as found in other books such as the Book of Tobias, is the Archangel Raphael. One night, after a cosmic party that was given in my honor because I had been qualified in the first initiation, I was properly instructed. "You will have to pay for the crime of having assassinated the god Mercury," I was told. "Forgive me this karma. This cannot be forgiven and can only be paid for by working with the moon." I then saw how the moon will approach the planet Mercury more and more at each labor, until blending at last with it. My intimate real being, the god Mercury, Shiva, my monad, approaching me, said, "You have to use the boots of the god Mercury." Later on, he put these boots on me. That moment when the great Hierophant of the temple showed me a sporting ground was for me sensational, extraordinary. "Look," he told me, "you have converted the temple of Mercury into a sporting ground." Certainly, we all assassinate Hiram, the god Mercury, our monad, when we eat from the forbidden fruit of the Garden of Eden. This is why we were warned, if you eat from that fruit you will die. Later on, the path became frightfully difficult, and I had to suffer intensely. It is obvious that the path of the razor's edge is absolutely sexual. You know it. My son, you have to suffer patiently the consequences of your errors, said my divine mother Kundalini. Another night, full of pain, my mother shouts in a great voice, saying, "My son, you have replaced me in the physical world with other women." That was in the past, my mother. Now I am not replacing you with anybody, you have replaced me with other women. The past is past, what is interesting is the present. I live from instant to instant. It is wrong for me to argue with you, past, present or future. You are the same one, you are right, my mother. How could I deny, then, that I had converted the temple of Mercury into a sporting ground? And it happened that having gone on holiday to the port of Acapulco in the Pacific coast of Mexico, I had to be instructed on the stigmatization of the astral body. Outside of the physical body, a holy monk, a hermit, tried to pierce the palm of my hands with the purpose of stigmatizing me. At the time when that monk hit the nail to perforate my hands, divine rays burst up. At that moment I prayed to my Father who is in secret, asking for help. The prayer reached the Lord. It is unquestionable that I had received such stigmata during the initiation, but in a symbolic form. During the Mountain of Resurrection, I had to give them shape, make them in the forge of the Cyclops. The anchorite lead me to the Gnostic church. Shiva, my divine monad, came with us. Inside the temple I saw a religious androgyne, dressed in the purple tunic, next to the font of baptism. He is very strong and responds very well, but he should fulfill in a better way the sacrament of the Church of Rome, love, said the Mahatma addressing my monad. Since then, I understood the need to refine even more the creative energy. In this way I made a form of prayer out of the Mithuna. The insertion of the vertical phallus inside the formal uterus makes a cross. Unquestionably, the 5 Christic stigmata in the astral body form a holy cross. The resurrection is not possible without having previously formed the stigmata of the adorable in the astral body. Thus, I formed my stigmata, thus the mystics of all ages have formed theirs. INRI. Ignis Natura Renovator Integram. Fire renews nature unceasingly. Third Mountain. The Ascension. Chapter 44. Conversing in Mexico. Monday, the 12th of June, 1972, 10th year of Aquarius. Well, Joko, familiar diminutive of Joaquim, today we are going to the city center. What for, master? Last Saturday we collected the mail from the post office. What can we find now? In any case, I need to go to the city center. I have a check in my possession, and I must cash it. It is not a great amount, but it will be enough to eat. Then I will not have to touch the small sum I have put together to pay the rent. Besides, I have to send many letters at the post office. I like to have the correspondence up to date. A few moments later, Joaquim Amortegui V., international Gnostic missionary and great champion of this tremendous crusade for the new era of Aquarius, and my insignificant person, worth somewhat less than the ash of a cigarette, made our way to the center of Ciudad de Mexico, Mexico City. It is not too much to say that I like to drive my own car. Thus, very happily we glided very fast down by the avenue of Tlalpan, towards the square of the Constitution, the Zocalo, as we Mexicans say. This is the era of the automobile, my dear Joko, but I frankly confess that if I had to choose a life in a world with a technology like this one, or in another in a stone age but actually totally spiritual, I would prefer the second one, unquestionably, even. Though instead of using the automobile I had to travel by foot or mounted on a donkey, oh, I also say the same thing. I travel now as a sacrifice, because of the love for humanity, to teach the doctrine, but I prefer to ride on the donkeys and horses of olden days. I do not like the smoke of these great cities, or this mechanistic life. Thus, conversing, Joko and I, along an avenue that seemed to be a river of cement and steel, reached the side of the Metropolitan Cathedral and then went along the Avenue 5 de Mayo looking for parking. A few moments later we went into a great building. Would you like us to clean your car? No. No, no. This is a time of much rain, so what for? Shall we wax your car, sir? No, lad, no. First, I have to take it to the body shop and have it repainted. Conclusion, we left that building towards the post office after having parked the car. At the main post office, I certainly had a nice surprise when I received a copy of the 6th edition of The Perfect Matrimony. It was sent to me from Cucuta, Colombia, South America, by the international Gnostic missionary Efren Villegas Quintero. I also received some letters. I sent those I had brought from home and then we went to a bureau de change. The money changer, with the consciousness deeply asleep, was too busy changing money. I saw him with 2 telephones, one in his right and the other in his left hand. Clearly, he was dealing with 2 calls at the same time, and he even talked for a while to a third client that was before the counter of the bureau. Obviously, the poor intellectual humanoid of subjective psyche was not only totally identified with everything, but also tremendously fascinated, and kept on dreaming. This rational homunculus spoke of values, quotations, currencies, gold, enormous sums, checks, riches, etc., etc., etc. Luckily, it was not necessary to wait a long time. His secretary dealt with us in a diligent manner. Moments later, we left this place with some money in the purse. It wasn't much, but enough to pay for the food of a few more days. Again, walking along the famous 5 de Mayo Avenue, I felt the need to invite Joko to partake of a small refreshment. He, who does not eat much, did not decline the invitation because of his regard towards me. Undoubtedly, we found a beautiful place. I wish to refer to the Café Paris. An elegant waitress approached us. "What do you wish, sir?" "Please, Miss, I told her a strawberry ice cream and a piece of cheesecake." I said Joko would like only a papaya ice cream. Having taken the orders from the gentleman, the lady went away to reappear later with the requested dishes. Savoring very slowly the delicious snack, extracting from the food its spiritual element, I started the following dialogue with Joko. "Let me tell you, Joko, that I am approaching the end of my book entitled The Three Mountains. Certainly, it is only lacking an introduction to the third mountain, 3 chapters on the Ascension and the conclusion. Then you are already finishing this work." "Yes, Joko. Yes, yes. It is very interesting that now I have to have recourse to Lemuria." "What? To Lemuria? Why?" "It is clear that in this reincarnation I have only reached the summit of the second mountain. However, in this ancient continent Mu or Lemuria, in olden days situated in the vast Pacific Ocean, I reached the 3 mountains. I unquestionably achieved then the liberation, but I renounced total happiness and stayed in this valley of tears to help humanity. In fact, the possession of the elixir of long life permitted me to conserve that Lemurian body during millions of years. Thus, my dear Joko, I tell you that I was a witness to all those volcanic catastrophes that finished the continent of Mu. It is evident that after more than 10,000 years of unceasing earthquakes and frightful seaquakes, that ancient land submerged among the stormy waters of the Pacific Ocean. It is a moving, clear and definite fact that as that old continent was slowly submerging into the wild waves of the stormy ocean, Atlantis, that one of Plato, arose gradually from among the deep waters of the Atlantic. Unquestionably, I also lived with my Lemurian body in the country of the hills of mud. I knew its powerful civilizations, much superior to our culture, and I saw it submerge among the furious waves of the ocean that carries its name. In the year 6 of Can, the 11 Mulek, in the month of ZRC, terrible earthquakes took place that continued without interruption until 13 Chen. The country of the hills of mud, the Atlantean land, was sacrificed. After 2 commotions, it disappeared during the night, being constantly shaken by the subterranean fires that made the earth sink and reappear several times and in several places. At the end, the surface yielded and 10 countries were separated and disappeared. 64 million inhabitants sank 8,000 years before this book was written. This is a textual quotation from a Mayan manuscript part of the famous collection of Le Plongeon, the manuscripts of Troano, that can be found in the British Museum. Before the star ball fell into the place where now there is only sea, before the 7 cities with their golden doors and their transparent temples trembled and shook like the leaves of a tree moved by the storm, I left, headed for the central plateau of Asia, to that place where Tibet can now be found. In that zone of the earth, the surviving Atlanteans became intermixed with the Nordic people. In this way, the first subrace of our Aryan race was formed. The savior guide of the elected Atlanteans, the one that got them out of the country of the hills of mud, was the biblical Noah, the Manu Vaivasvata, the founder of the Aryan race. I still remember, far in time and distance, those cosmic festivals that were celebrated in our monastery at that time. I wish to refer in an emphatic manner to the Sacred Order of Tibet, an ancient esoteric institution. It is indubitable that this ancient order has 201 members. The staff is composed of 72 Brahmins. Unquestionably, such a worthy mystical organization keeps the treasure of Aryabharta Ashram. At that time, I was always received there with much veneration. It was exotic to live with a Lemurian body in a fully Aryan world. Unfortunately, the devil puts his tail in, wherever he may be, and something unwanted happened. I went back to my old ways, backsliding into crime. I again fell in love with Eve, the seductress of the Hebraic mythology, and I ate the forbidden fruit. Result: the great law took away from me such a precious vehicle, and from one life to another I remained like the wandering Jew on the surface of the earth. Now, Master, I do feel smaller than an ant, like nothing. I do not understand. If you dissolve the ego, the myself, who could be the tempter? How did you fall, oh, Joko? In the name of truth, I want you to know that if the ego is dissolved, the mind stays in its place. Undoubtedly, this was the causa causorum of my fall. This is something unwanted, I do not understand. Passionate things, I fell in love, I committed the same error as the Count Zanoni, that is all. Such a maiden of mysterious charms, for me was forbidden. However, I must admit that I fell at the feet of the delicious woman. My divine mother Kundalini took me later to the interior of a cave, in the depth of a mountain, and I then saw rain, tears and torrents of turbid water, bitterness and mud, misery, etc., etc., etc. See the future that lies in wait for you, said my mother. My begging was useless, I did not deserve to be pardoned, it was a relapse into crime. At the end I saw her shut herself in the chakra muladhara in the coccyx, and then, oh my God! I had committed the same error that in the archaic continent Mu gave rise to the angelic fall. It is unquestionable that before joining the Lemurian mysteries I had already committed the same crime. The allegory of the biblical Adam, considered apart from the tree of life, clearly means that the Lemurian race, which had just separated into the opposite sexes, abused sex and sunk into the region of animality and bestiality. The Zohar teaches that Matramitha, Shekinah, symbolically the wife of Metraton, is the way towards the great tree of life, the powerful tree, and Shekinah is the divine grace. There is no doubt that this marvelous tree reaches the celestial valley, and it is hidden in the midst of the 3 mountains. From these 3 mountains the tree ascends towards the heights and soon starts descending to lower regions. The tree of knowledge of good and evil grows from the roots of the tree of life. The Dhyanis bodhisattvas reincarnated in Lemurian bodies, reproduced by means of the power of Kriya Shakti, the power of the will and of the yoga. Attributes of Shiva, the black lingam inserted into the yoni. Unquestionably the arch-hierophanton. And Archmagus never spills the cup of Hermes. When the Yanis among which I counted myself committed the crime of spilling this flexible, liquid, malleable glass of the alchemy, they moved away from their divine monad, they assassinated the god Mercury, fell into the animal generation. I am astounded. Why, Joko? Because I was perhaps the first to fall, or the last one? H. P. Blavatsky says in The Secret Doctrine that Samael was the first to fall, but this is symbolic. It is clear that I am the Yoni Bodhisattva of the 5th of the 7, and because of this it is said that Samael was the first one to fall. Luckily, I am standing now, in spite of having relapsed into the same crime. How different was the case of many of those other Dhyanis who fell into the animal generation. Let us remember Moloch, the great murderer, now involuting appallingly in the infernal worlds. Let us remember Andromlech and his brother Asmodeus, too. Thrones precipitated into the Avern in the infernal worlds. Let us remember Andromlech and his brother Asmodeus, 2 thrones precipitated into the Avern. I thought that after the liberation any fall was impossible. You are wrong, my dear Joko. In the cosmos there is always the danger of falling. Only by entering the unmanifest sat, the absolute abstract space, does every danger disappears. Once finished the conversation, we called the waitress that humbly looked after the table of the gentleman. The bill, miss. Yes, sir, it is that much. Here you are, also your tip. Quietly we left that luxurious place to look for the car. Walking again under the light of the sun along that famous Avenue 5 de Mayo, it occurred to me to say, the grave thing, oh, the Joko, is the abominable resurrection of the animal ego after the fall. Unquestionably the myself resuscitates like the phoenix from the midst of its own ashes. You will understand now in a deep and integral way what the intrinsic motive is by which all religious theogonies emphasize the idea that the fallen angels became demons. Ah. Yes. This is very clear. Moments later we were gliding along the avenue of Plowpan to return home. Since I have ascended and descended and again ascended, it is obvious that I have a vast experience in matters of an esoteric type. Oh, Master! In this sense you have a very special experience. Certainly, my dear reader, I am nothing more than a miserable worm from the mud of the earth, a worthless nobody. However, since I have traveled the path, I can show it to others with complete clarity, and this is not a crime. We shall finish this chapter with the phrase by Goethe, "Every theory is gray, and it is only the tree with golden fruit that is green, and this is really life." Chapter 45. The 10th Labor of Hercules. The 10th feat of Hercules, the great solar hero, was the conquest of the herd of Geryon, killing its owner, who confronted him after his guardians, the dogs Ortros and Eurytion. This unusual happening had as stage the island of Erysia, the Red, beyond the ocean, which appears to refer to an island in the Atlantic Ocean inhabited by gigantic beings, clearly personified by the same tricipit Geryon, who was killed by Hercules' lethal arrows, after his shepherd and his dog, killed by his mace. Comparative mythology compares the dog Ortros, brother of Cerberus, with Vitra, the Vedic spirit of the storm. During his journey Hercules goes from Europe to Africa, to go across the ocean in the Golden Cup, in the sacred vessel, using it in an intelligent way in his nocturnal travels. This clearly means that the brilliant sun had to wait for him while he returned, stopping at his solstice for the good of the hero. Undoubtedly the man-god passed with the herd acquired in the same vessel or Holy Grail, to return soon by the way of the old Europe, in a trip full of infinite adventures. The legend of the centuries tells us that then the solar hero raised the columns J and B of the occult masonry over the Strait of Gibraltar, probably as thanks to the Dioscurs, who helped him to arise victorious in this task. Having returned to Mycenae, the cows were sacrificed to Juno, to placate her anger, by her brother Eurystheus. When dealing with the archaic mysteries, it is not too much to say that these were always celebrated in august lordly temples. When I crossed the threshold of that Mu or Lemurian temple, where in other times I was instructed in the mysteries of the Ascension of the Lord, with infinite humility I asked the Hierophant for some services that were conceded to me. It is indubitable and this is known by every initiate that every exaltation must be preceded by a frightful and terrible humiliation. We have clearly asserted in an emphatic tone that every ascent is preceded by a descent. The 10th feat of Hercules, the solar hero of esotericism, takes place in the infernal worlds of the planet Pluto. Painful feelings tore my soul apart when I saw myself submitted to the torture of detachment. Those ladies of august times, bound to me by the law of karma, were waiting for me in the Avern with their broken hearts. All these tempting lovelies, dangerously beautiful, felt they had complete authority over me. For good or for bad, these terribly delicious females had been my wives in previous reincarnations, as a natural consequence of the Great Rebellion and the angelic fall. The dogs Ortros and Eurytion, living symbols of the animal passion, besieged me severely with unprecedented force. They multiplied the temptations ad infinitum. However, on the basis of thelema, will, and deep understanding, and with the help of my divine mother Kundalini, I beat the Lord of Time, Geryon. It is indubitable that I got hold of the herd and became an authentic shepherd, not of cows as it is implied in a veiled manner, but of sheep. For the good of the great cause, it is convenient that we study now some verses from chapter 10 of St. John's Gospel 29. Truly, truly I say to you, he who does not enter the sheepfold by the door, the sex, but climbs by another way, preaching different doctrines that have nothing to do with the white sexual magic, that man is a thief and a robber. He steals the sheep and takes them to the abyss. We departed from Eden through the door of sex. Only through this door we can return to Eden. Eden is sex itself. He who enters by the door, the sex, is the shepherd of the sheep. To him the gatekeeper opens, the sheep hear his voice, and he calls his own sheep by name, with the intimate word, and leads them out. He takes them by the path of the razor's edge. When he has brought out all his own, he goes before them, and the sheep follow him, for they know his voice, his word. A stranger they will not follow, but they will flee from him, for they do not know the voice of strangers. The false shepherds do not have the word. Jesus, whose meaning is Savior, delivered to them this parable, but they did not understand the things of which he spoke. It is evident that behind the letter that kills is the spirit that brings to life. Jesus, the intimate Savior, told them again 30. Truly, truly I say to you, I am the door for the sheep. The power is not in the brain or in any other part of the body, but in the sex. In other words, we assert the following: the creative power of the Logos can be found exclusively in sex. It is easy to understand now why he is the gate for sheep. To find other ways to escape is equivalent to run away from the door of Eden. All who came before me, because they had not been initiated in the sexual mysteries, are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not heed them. I am the door. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved. They will not fall into the abyss of perdition. They will come in and out and find pasture, rich spiritual sustenance. Without the sexual serpent, Christ could do nothing. It is because of this that the second Logos, the Lord of perfection, the intimate logoi of each other, descends from his elevated sphere and makes himself become the son of the divine mother Kundalini, the igneous serpent of our magic powers. By deed and grace of the third Logos. The Scythians adored the great light and said that the sun in his emanations gives shape to a nest in us and constitutes the serpent. It is clear that that Gnostic sect had as a sacred object a chalice, a yoni, the Holy Grail, in which they took the semen of Benjamin. This was in itself a mixture of wine and water. The sacred symbol of the sexual serpent indubitably was never lacking on the altar of the Nazarene Gnostics. The strength, the power that accompanied Moses was the serpent on the staff that later became the staff itself. This serpent was certainly the one who spoke to the other serpents and tempted Eve. In the canto of Homer to Demeter, found in a Russian library, it can be seen that everything revolved around a physiological cosmic fact of great transcendence. I am the good shepherd, the one who reached this esoteric Christic grade, gives his life for his sheep. But the hired help, the tantric esotericist that has not yet achieved Christification, who does not own the sheep, sees the wolf coming, and leaves the sheep and runs away, and the wolf snatches them away, and the sheep are scattered. And other sheep I have, which are not from this fold, they are within other schools, them also I must bring, and they shall hear my voice, and there will be one fold and one shepherd. Therefore, does my Father love me, because I lay down my life, that I might take it again. The intimate Christ crystallizes inside of us and redeems us when we are worthy. No man takes it from me, but I lay it of myself, as if saying, I crystallize in my human person when I want. I have the power to lay it down, and I have the power to take it again. This commandment have I received from my Father. After this critical esoteric comment, it is indispensable that we continue with the present chapter. What simple, what unfalsifiable primitive beauty have those Platonic stories that deal with archaic gods and goddesses, divine beings from the Lemurian past, authentic tantric shepherds of the sexual Eden. Plus ultra, Adam Cadman, celestial man, such are the mystical significances that have been attributed to the two columns of Hercules. That cosmic human event was preceded by my priestess wife Lytolantes becoming discarnate. Unquestionably she, in herself, was certainly the only karmic link left for me in this painful valley of samsara. I saw her withdrawing from her discarded Lemurian vehicle, certainly dressed in the deepest mourning. Adam Eve is indubitably the most secret meaning of the two columns of Hercules. Reconciliation with the divine is urgent, pressing. You know that. To build columns is reconciliation, the return of the original couple, coming back to Eden. We need to return to the original point of departure, to return to the first love. This is indisputable and unquestionable. In the archaic mysteries of the continent Mu or Lemuria, I had to live the raw realism of this in paradisiac, Edenic weddings. Then I received as wife a great initiate. I wish to refer in an emphatic manner to my better half, to my particular Eve. Thus, I built the two columns of Hercules. I was at the table of the banquet, accompanied, happy, by my new wife and many high priests. Lytolantes then crossed the threshold of the regal hall. She came in a discarnate state to watch the festivity. Thus, oh, gods! It was how I re-established the second logos, the cosmic Christ, in the sanctuary of my soul. Sublime creatures that build cyclopean cities, educate people, giving them a legislation never surpassed, and reward their heroism. To fulfill in oneself the Hyperborean mystery, the mystery of the Grail, is urgent when we yearn to convert ourselves into authentic prophets, into genuine Christified shepherds. We need to pass over the Red Sea, to cross the stormy ocean of life, reach the other side in the golden cup, the sacred goblet that Helios, the sacred absolute sun, lends to us. Once finished the esoteric tasks in the hells of the planet Pluto, I had to build up the columns. Chapter 46. The 11th Labor of Hercules. The 11th labor of Hercules, the solar hero, took place in the transatlantic domain, consisting of the seizure of the apples of Hesperides, the nymphs daughters of Hesperus, vivid representation of the planet Venus, the delicious bright star of love. Unsure of the way, he first needed to get hold of Nereus, who knows everything, and then in Africa to confront the frightful giant Antaeus, son of Poseidon, in hand-to-hand combat. Sometimes related to this journey is the liberation of Prometheus Lucifer, killing an eagle that torments him, as well as the temporary substitution of the famous Atlas, supporting the world on his titanic shoulders, to obtain his help. Finally, the symbolic golden apples were given to him by the Hesperides, previously killing the dragon that was guarding them. Evidently, this feat bears a close relationship to the biblical story of the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, in the Edenic garden, in which, however, the dragon was substituted by a serpent, who invites to gather and taste this marvelous fruit that Hercules later on gives to Athena, the goddess of knowledge and his divine protector. The intrepid descent to the old Tartarus of the 11th planet of our solar system was made urgent, unpostponable, before the ascent to the Father, the first Logos. Abrupt, broken and uneven descending path, it led me fatally to those horrendous shadows of the city of Dis. My Nereus, or better said, my guru, master or guide, patiently showed me all the dangers. And it certainly was in those horrifying abyss of pain, in that planet which is beyond the orbit of Pluto, where I found Antaeus, the enormous giant, more dreadful even than the disproportionate Briareus. The Florentine Dante, in his Divine Comedy, says, "Oh, you, who in that fortunate valley which made Scipio the heir of so much glory, when Hannibal and his followers showed their backs, took more than 1,000 lions for your prey, and if you had been in that ambitious war, with your brothers here, according to what some think, the sons of the earth would have then won the day. Take us down, and do not be unwilling, to where the cold imprisons Cocytus. Do not make us go to Tityos or Typhon, this man can give what here is so desired, therefore bend down, and do not twist your lips. He can still give you your fame on earth, for he still lives, and has a long life to come, unless before the time grace calls him in." So said the master, and the giant, in haste, stretched out his hands, from which, in other times, Hercules had felt stress, and took him up. When Virgil felt the grasp upon him, he told me, "Come here, so that I can take you." And then he embraced me, and made a bundle of himself and me. As the tower of Garacenda seems to the eye from the sloping side when a cloud passes over it, as if it were leaning into the opposite direction, so Antaeus seemed to me, as I stood and gaped to see him bend, and it was such a moment that I should have wished to go some other way. But he led us lightly to those depths of the abyss that devours Lucifer and Judas, and did not stay there bending over us, but rose as a mast does on a ship. This is a textual quotation from the Divine Comedy. Antaeus, allegoric magician character, representative titan of the abysmal, dark hordes. Having fought my bloody battles against the demons of the city of Dis, Lucifer Prometheus had to be freed. I saw the steel door of his dreadful cell open, the guard let him through. Horrible scenes in the dark abode, unwanted cases, unsuspected, which the inhabitants of the earth ignore. Lucifer is the guardian of the door of the keys of the sanctuary, so that only the anointed that know the secret of Hermes can penetrate it. The Christ Lucifer of the Gnostics is the God of wisdom under different names, the God of our planet Earth without any shadow of evil, because he is one with the Platonic Logos. Prometheus Lucifer is the minister of the solar logos and lord of the 7 mansions of Hades. Lucifer is certainly the spirit of the spiritual illumination of humanity and of the freedom of choice and, metaphysically, the torch of humanity, the logos in his superior aspect, and the adversary in his inferior one, the divine and chained Prometheus, the active and centrifugal energy of the universe, fire, light, life, struggle, effort, consciousness, freedom, independence, etc., etc., etc. To Lucifer are entrusted the sword and the balance of the cosmic justice, because he is the norm of weight, the measure, and the number. Inside each one of us, Lucifer is the reflection of the intimate logoi, shadow of the Lord projected onto the depth of our being. At the moment I am writing these words, I remember an unusual case. Some night, no matter which, I happened to meet a frightful character inside a beautiful bedroom. Impressive, Prometheus Lucifer, standing on paws rather than feet, looked at me, menacingly. 2 frightful horns could be seen, terrifying, on his sinister forehead. He was however dressed like an elegant gentleman. Approaching him, serenely I patted him on the shoulder and at the same time I told him, "You do not frighten me, I know you too well, you have not been able to defeat me, I am victorious." The Colossus left and I, sitting on the comfortable and perfumed bed of mahogany, waited for a moment. Soon afterwards a dangerously beautiful female came into the bedroom. Naked, she lay down on the bed. Almost passing out because of lust, the beautiful one encircled me in her lustful arms, inviting me to the pleasures of the flesh. Lying down next to the beauty, I demonstrated my powers to the devil. I controlled myself. Afterwards I got up from the bed of pleasure. The woman, nearly dead of lust, feeling cheated, looked at me uselessly. Then a shining child entered the room, a glittering creature terrifyingly divine. The sublime infant, richly dressed in a beautiful priestly tunic of a very special black color, went across the exotic room. I recognized him immediately and getting close to him very quietly, I told him, "It is useless for you to go on dressing up. I always recognize you, oh, Lucifer. You will never defeat me." That sublime creature, terror of the ignorance, smiled then with an infinite sweetness. Unquestionably, he is the divine daimon of Socrates, our special trainer in the psychological gymnasium of life. Just as his freedom after such hard work, the logos swallows him, absorbs him. This story ends here. Let us continue with the transcendental subject of this chapter. My new priestess in the mountain of Ascension turned out to be extraordinary. Obviously, my intimate progress was accelerated and, as a consequence, I managed to get hold of the golden apples in the garden of the Hesperides. The Venusian nymphs, exquisitely delicious, dropped at my feet. They could not defeat me. Once finished the magic labors in that Avern, I ascended victorious to the Father. It is obvious that that mystical transcendental happening could in no way be overlooked. That cosmic event was then celebrated with infinite joy in the sancta. On a splendid throne, seated before the august brotherhood, I felt totally transformed. At that indescribable moment, the Ancient of the Days, my Father who is in secret, the kindness of kindness, the occult of the occult, the mercy of the mercies, the Kether of the Hebraic Kabbalah, shone inside me, definitely crystallized in the whole presence of my being. At such a moment, the brotherhood of the universal white fraternity contemplated me with infinite veneration. My face took on the aspect of old age. Indubitably, I had been able to crystallize in the diverse parts of my being the 3 primary forces of the universe. Chapter 47. The 12th labor of Hercules, the 12th labor of Hercules, the solar hero, was certainly imposed by his brother, that is, by his shining divine prototype, in the sacred absolute Sunday. Undoubtedly, such labor consisted in fetching up from his plutonic domain the dog Cerberus that was guarding it. Having gone into the subterranean abode of the dead, he tries first to propitiate Adonio, who permits him to take the dog on the condition that he manages to take hold of it without arms, which he achieves by grabbing it first by its dragon tail and then by the neck until almost choking it. Hermes guided it in the return path, and after Cerberus was shown in Mycenae, he left it free to return to its residence. Unquestionably, our shining solar system of ores has 12 planets, and this reminds us of the 12 saviors. It is obvious and evident that the final labor of Hercules had to take place in the 12th planet of the solar family. Equally, only with Scorpio, whose constellation is the most appropriate to find it out, we can and must relate the last of his zodiacal feats, consisting in fetching up the dog Cerberus from the jealous subterranean world, from the kingdom of the shadows, where the truth is dressed up as darkness. Naturally, he can only fulfill this labor with the consent of the same Hades or Pluto, and with the joint help of Hermes and Minerva. Sex yoga and wisdom. With infinite veneration, I crossed the threshold of the temple. I yearned for the final liberation. In the walled courtyard of the priests shone gloriously the spermatic waters of the sacred pool. The initiatic lake of the representation of the ancient mysteries, eternal stage of every temple, could not be missing from there. What I had asked then in that Lemurian sancta, unquestionably had been given to me. My work was started with the descent to the Tartarus of that planet, 12th of our solar system. 3 delicious women, dangerously beautiful, appealed in vain with all of their irresistible charms. These provocative she-devils struggled in vain. They wanted to make me fall, but I knew how to keep control of myself. The zodiacal sign of Scorpio let loose in my creative organs all their passionate ardor, but I won all the battles against myself. The guide dog, the sexual instinct, always leads the knight along the narrow path that goes from darkness to light, from death to immortality. The dog pulls the leash of his master, taking him by the steep path towards the winning post. Later on, the dog must rest, then comes the great renunciation. In harmonious rhythmic concordance with this cosmic sexual event, the supreme detachment from all material things and the radical elimination of the desire to exist takes place, inaudible. The transcendental idea of the breath of the shadows, moving over the sleeping waters of life, that is the primordial matter with the spirit latent in it, invites us to reflect. In every cosmogony, the water, the ens seminis, plays the same important role. It is the basis and origin of the material existence and the foundation of every intimate self-realization. However, it is urgent never to ignore that in the primitive abyss, at the depth of the waters, live many dangerous beasts. If the divine titans of the old continent Mu, those angels fallen into the animal generation, had not forgotten this tremendous truth, if they had stayed alert and vigilant like the watchmen in times of war, they would still be in a paradisiacal state. To completely get hold of the dog Cerberus without any weapons means the absolute control over sex. Once I became the owner of the dog, I ascended victorious from the depths of the horrendous and black precipice. Then the being of my being was incarnated in me, that which is beyond Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, that divine solar absolute prototype. When that mystical fact took place, I happily entered into a small sanctuary of the sacred absolute Sunday. From that extraordinary instant I could nourish myself from the tree of life, beyond good and evil. I had returned to the original point of departure. Unquestionably, I had returned to my abode. Each one of us has in that radiant sphere of light and joy his divine prototype. The sacred individuals that inhabit the central sun are prepared to enter the absolute abstract space. This always happens at the end of Mahamvantra, cosmic day. Each universe of the infinite space has its own central sun, and the total sum of such spiritual suns constitutes the protocosmos. The emanation of our omnimerciful and sacred solar absolute is what H.P.B. calls the great breath, to itself deeply unknown. Obviously, this omnipresent active principle, even if a participant in the creation of worlds, does not melt into these worlds. It stays independent, omnipresent, and omnipenetrating. It is easy to understand that the emanation of the solar absolute unfolds into the 3 primary forces Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva, with the evident purpose of creating and then going back again to create. When any cosmic manifestation finishes, the 3 original forces integrate to blend or fuse with the unceasing breath, to itself deeply unknown. That which happens in the macrocosmos is repeated in the microcosmic man. Such was my particular case. Thus, I was able to return to the bosom of the sacred solar absolute. However, I continued with the physical Lemurian body, living for millions of years. I became one more of the stones of the guardian wall. That wall is formed by all masters of compassion, those that renounced every happiness because of love for humanity. Inverential peace. Samael Aun Weor.